Have we started? Okay.
As chair of this seminar, I call this meeting to order. Today we're going to be discussing Venezuela at the Crossroads, and the opener is Eduardo Martinez. And just a couple of reminders: if you have any electronic devices that make noise, like phones, try to silence them, turn them down, turn them off, whatever it takes so that they don't interrupt the presentation and the discussion. And let's keep the discussion respectful and on topic for the most part. And I turn it over to Eduardo.
Good evening, everyone. So as I was just reminded a couple moments ago, today is actually 11 years to the date since I left Venezuela. So very coincidental that I'm giving this particular talk today. I wanted to cover a few different parts of the story, both from the Venezuelan perspective, from the U.S. perspective, and then finally where both of those perspectives meet today, so that's that crossroads. I will start with what it's like to be inside of Venezuela. So picture the early 2010s, and store shelves are going empty. Street protests are swelling with outraged citizens banging pots and pans, and a currency so devalued that you needed a backpack of bills to buy a carton of eggs. Now for me, what this looked like was I had started out 2013 working as a bartender. I was 17, I want to say, and I was making about $900 a month, which there was very good money, probably about double the minimum wage at the time. It was an upscale steakhouse in a university town, which also had a lot of tourism, called Merida. And so you would see a lot of people from Switzerland, from Germany, from Canada, and you'd often get tips in euro and dollars, and so I was making good money for Venezuela standards. Then the devaluation of the currency really ramps up, and by the end of that year, I was making about $2 a month in terms of real purchasing power. This was the reality that I lived through, and millions of Venezuelans lived through back then as well. So taking us back before we get into kind of the history and the geopolitics, I want to start with some of the realities and what was real for me there. And so in this city, I was really just trying to shape my life, young adult, but I was in a country that was already starting to crack at the seams. I remember when the protests kicked off, I was working, I was in a restaurant, and suddenly gunfire came through the windows, and panic, everybody left, didn't really know what to do. I walked out into the street, and I see on one side of this large intersection a bunch of National Guard shooting tear gas into the street, and the other side, what are called motorizados, which are just these armed civilians on motorcycles, most of them aligned with the government, intimidating, being violent and unpredictable. And so I really didn't know what was the safe direction to walk home. There was no bus, and so I walked 10 miles to get back to where I was living, and everything was just very crazy. Streets were being closed off, it was just chaotic, and over those next few days, I became involved in the widespread protests across the country, where the demonstrations against the government became pretty dark, in the sense that we began hearing warnings, and not rumors, but credible threats that colectivos were going around, and capturing people, intimidating them. And for context, colectivos are sort of these government-aligned militias that exist in communities. Think of sleeper cells that during these times of protest are activated and suddenly show up at your door if they know that you've been going to protest and things like this. And this was not just to scare you or to disperse you in a protesting thing, but really to capture you, torture you, repress you, and in many cases kill you for speaking out against the government. In fact, over those months in 2014, 43 students were killed in these protests. And I was threatened and told that all my family and myself were going to be murdered for participating in protest because my aunt was aligned with the government, had a role in the government, and so it looked really bad if her nephew is very vocal against the government. And so there was some context there as to why me and why my Facebook post and consistent photography documenting the protest were on the radar of these colectivos. And so I left Merida overnight with no planning, no goodbyes to my friends, and I had to flee to Caracas because I knew that staying meant risking my life. And so I tell this story because when people talk abstractly about unrest or protest, they miss what this actually means. It means choosing between state violence and irregular armed groups. It means being forced out of your city because of political speech, becoming a death sentence. And this is the human reality behind everything I'm going to talk about tonight. So how did Venezuela reach that breaking point? To understand, we first have to look at the rise of Chavismo. Back in the 1990s, Venezuela was a flawed but functional democracy. At that point, Hugo Chavez, who was elected in 1998, wrote a populist campaign into Miraflores, which is our White House, on a campaign that was quite literally dubbed "Make Venezuela Great Again." I'm not joking, that's a literal translation.
Wow. Wow.
On the premise that other countries were taking advantage of Venezuela's wealth, that there was too much illegal immigration from Colombia, that there was bad trade deals, and that all of that needed to be rewritten and redone in order to establish great Venezuela again. Interesting. Populism, right? But beneath the surface, Chavez, at that time, who was prior to becoming president, part of the armed forces, so part of the Venezuelan military, and later Nicolás Maduro, were dismantling institutional checks and balances. They concentrated power, they politicized the court system, and they purged the military of any dissent. This led to widespread corruption. The economy also grew absurdly dependent on oil exports, while every other industry withered. And we end up seeing this come to a boiling point when oil prices collapse around 2014. And Venezuela had no savings cushion and no independent institutions to correct course. And so what followed was that economic freefall that we lived through. All of those years of mismanagement and corruption, not sanctions, wrecked the economy by the mid-2010s. And by 2019, after years of collapse, 96% of Venezuelans were living in poverty, with 71% in extreme poverty. Inflation hit 100,000% in 2018. Essentially, money stopped working. I remember the early days of hyperinflation, when bolivares would double weekly, and so you really couldn't cash your check and then expect, to have money to buy goods in the store. In fact, prices changed from morning to night. And so, you usually had to buy some kind of tangible good, whether it's maybe buy a camera or maybe buy a phone or something that you could then sell when it was time to do your groceries and things like this.
Oh, wow.
So people survived, myself included, obviously, by emigrating, by bartering, or by using the US dollars informally. It's really important for me, because I hear this a lot, to debunk the notion that US sanctions caused this crisis. The timing and the reality of the events just state otherwise. There's no valid leg to stand on that the sanctions caused this or are perpetuating it in any way whatsoever. Venezuela's implosion began well before heavy sanctions, and the country's sharp drop in oil production, its primary form of revenue, dropped way before anything to do with US sanctions. In other words, the house was already on fire due to bad governance and graft. Sanctions added gasoline to an existing blaze. One U.S. bipartisan report put it plainly. Venezuela's economic troubles were caused by widespread economic mismanagement and corruption. Under Chavez and Maduro, then later exacerbated by increased sanctions. So while Caracas officials often blame foreign sanctions for everything, Venezuelans themselves know that years of authoritarian kleptocracy set the stage for the humanitarian catastrophe. And in that point, it's ironic when you see that the wealthiest Venezuelans are those who form part of the top brass or the top leaders of the political system in Venezuela. For example, Chavez's daughter is, I don't know now, but as of the last reported figure I saw, worth approximately $4 billion, whose father said that being rich or wealthy was evil. So a big part of the kleptocracy that we see in Venezuela is actually the criminalization of the state itself, especially under Maduro. Venezuela has morphed into a full-blown narco state. A prime example of this is the Cartel de los Soles. And I want to address that because a lot of people will say, oh, this is some fictional thing or it doesn't exist or whatnot. It's a criminal enterprise, more like saying mafia. I think that sometimes we assign terms like cartel and say, if it's a cartel, then it's from Latin America. If it's from Eastern Europe, then it's a mafia. But really, it's more like a mafia. A mafia in the sense that the cartel is this informal criminal enterprise that runs everything from drug trafficking to human trafficking to weapons trafficking. This is how the people in power in Venezuela make money. They use their positions to do this. Prior to any of the recent activities, meaning sanctions and things like this, I can't remember the year, I want to say maybe 2016, I have to double check my notes. 2 of Maduro's nephews were caught in France with a Venezuelan fighter, not fighter jet, but a some sort of a large carrier, some kind of carrier craft, some kind of large aircraft, attempting to smuggle 4 tons of cocaine into France on an official Venezuelan military jet.
Ain't gonna work.
They had diplomatic immunity, and the French didn't really want to get involved, so they just sent them back.
They keep the coke, though?
I have no idea. I don't think so. I don't think so.
For shame.
I think the Venezuelans did, and they were both, the nephews were both later arrested in Costa Rica at some point on drug trafficking charges. So the whole thought that this is not some large criminal enterprise or that all these people are not involved in things like drug trafficking, human trafficking, and weapons trafficking is just not true. It's just always been a reality that the military in Venezuela has always supplemented their very low salaries by participating in the drug trafficking trade. It's just now that has become the primary source of revenue for the people in power there.
And this was before Chavez, too?
Chavez did this as well. This was being done during Chavez's time in the military, and then later when he became president.
The USA Today, UN, and CIA say Venezuela is not a narco state.
It is.
They say that it isn't.
I don't care. Wonderful.
Well, hold on.
I lived
USA
it.
Today is somewhat of a reliable source.
No, it's not.
It's print. Well, it's print, so you
Okay.
can trust
But
it.
hold on, hold on. Call to order. Let's
rebuttal period.
let's allow Eduardo to continue.
All right, so Venezuelans and the corrupted institutions. I've kind of already talked about this. However, the U.S. Justice Department actually, has indicted Maduro and dozens of his officials on charges of narco-terrorism and trafficking. A lot of these indictments actually, and some of the work to indict them, is not just coming from this administration. These investigations and these indictments and these sort of what are our options and what's going on in the Western Hemisphere, like intelligence on this situation, goes back to the Obama administration when the widespread protests kicked off, where they had people looking into this from the US perspective in the Obama administration, because they were concerned that there could be what we now are living, mass migration, and a mass exodus of people tied to the collapse of a country in the same hemisphere as the United States. So, while the criminalized state has fueled violence and allowed transnational cartels to entrench themselves in Venezuela, which further erodes the rule of law, ordinary Venezuelans have not taken this lying down. We've had historic resistance, student movements, human rights groups, opposition leaders, despite political, and brutal oppression. I've lost many friends to the exile, people that I never said goodbye to because different situations, neighbors who vanished, who were taken by the state, who knows what happened to them, people that I know were tortured by the state for being part of student organized groups. But here I am reminded of the Nobel Peace Prize winner, laureate, Maria Corina Machado, who really celebrated Venezuelan people's courage and how the Venezuelan people will rise from this dark age of oppression with a single unbreakable mission of freedom. For me, and to kind of sum up the Venezuelan perspective, we have a once very wealthy nation that is crippled by political collapse and economic ruin. The rise of Chavismo replaced democratic institutions with personalized authoritarian rule. They hollowed out the state and created a toxic mix of corruption, criminal networks within the state, and policy blunders that led to a humanitarian disaster, the largest mass exodus of people in this hemisphere. 30% of the country no longer living there.
Quite the brain drain.
Throughout this, Venezuelans have endured this oppression and shown remarkable resilience and resistance. Many of us literally have risked our lives insisting on a better future. So that's the view from the ground in Venezuela. Now I want to switch to the view from Washington, D.C. So, the U.S. perspective. From the U.S. vantage point, Venezuela's crisis has gradually shifted from a distant tragedy to a direct strategic concern. Over the past decade, U.S. policy towards Venezuela has evolved significantly, from early diplomatic gestures to targeted sanctions, into now a much more forceful mix of economic pressure, legal action, and military-adjacent pressure as well in the region. So when we go back to the early days of Chavismo and early 2010s, most of Washington's strategy was to be diplomatic and not really get involved with the Venezuelan politics beyond occasional sanctions when it was just too, egregious to ignore. For example, it was President Obama in 2015 who first declared Venezuela a national security concern and sanctioned a number of officials within the Maduro regime for their violent crackdown on protesters. But these were relatively narrow measures. As the Maduro regime grew more repressive and as more Venezuelan people became more desperate, U.S. tactics hardened, with the major turning point being 2017 to 2019 during the first Trump administration, where we had the widespread oil and financial sanctions against Venezuela, which effectively cut off Venezuela's access to U.S. oil revenues and financial markets. The idea at the time was that you starve the regime of their money, and this will force political concessions. At the same time, the U.S. and many other countries recognized an individual, Juan Guaido, as Venezuela's legitimate interim president in 2019, who at that time attempted to diplomatically delegitimize Maduro. However, Maduro hung on, and I can cover Juan Guaido and everything that happened there. I have a separate page for that, but we don't have to dive into it now. And Maduro was really held up by Russia, China, Cuba, and his military cronies. During the same time, we saw the humanitarian crisis explode, which led to where we are today, that Washington is clearly now seeing that sanctions are not enough. So let's talk about legal pressures and indictments. In 2020, U.S. Justice Department labeled Nicolas Maduro and 14 top Venezuelan officials narco-terrorists and drug traffickers. The DOJ accused Maduro of running a narco-terrorism partnership with Colombia's FARC. This has always been true. There has always been criminal enterprises
What year did
within the
Maduro
militaries.
take over?
What was that? I'm sorry?
What year did Maduro take
Just
over?
so-
Right after Chavez died in 2013, I want to say.
Oh,
No,
13?
2013 he would have died.
He was a
yeah.
bus driver, right?
Well, yes, he was a bus driver. He also was a union organizer, so he was a leader within the union there.
Okay, go ahead. I was
Yeah.
just curious to.
Yeah, I mean, he was a bus driver, and he had a lot of the colectivos' power, these kind of like sleeper cells, come from the fact that, once again, I think back to the mafia. When you think of like, what is a big mafia guy here in Chicago, a bunch of movies about
Big
him.
Capone.
Yeah,
Al
like, you know,
Capone.
these union guys who are involved with mob and mafia and all this, think like that. So yes, he
Like
was
Trump now.
a bus driver,
Of
but
course,
like,
we
you know,
understand.
Tony Soprano was, you know, a garbage truck company, right? It's kind of like that.
Waste management.
Right, waste management, exactly. So it's kind of like saying that, you know what I mean? Like all he did was waste management, yeah. Okay, now I kind of want to talk about this, which was the release in November of the U.S.'s national security strategy. And this is very important to the Venezuela situation and what I expect to happen next, or why I expect, you know, Maduro to fall and for the government in Venezuela to transition back into a democracy.
Is that roughly 30-some-odd page document that just came out?
Yeah,
Okay, okay.
I won't read the whole thing. I will say
Oh.
on page
Read the whole thing. Read the whole thing.
Do it.
What are you trying to hide?
So here is on
It's all
page
about the
5.
oil.
Page 5, which is titled, this section is titled, What Do We Want in and from the World? So the first bullet point, we want to ensure that the Western Hemisphere remains reasonably stable and well-governed enough to prevent and discourage mass migration to the United States. We want a hemisphere whose governments cooperate with us against narco-terrorists, cartels, and other transnational criminal organizations. We want a hemisphere that remains free of hostile foreign incursion and ownership of key assets, and that supports critical supply chains. We also want to ensure our continued access to key strategic locations. In other words, we will assert and enforce a Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine.
Nothing about oil.
This is, well, the key strategic assets.
Oh, no, code. Okay, gotcha.
For me, the key takeaway in this document, it's very clear. The U.S. wants to reassert its influence in Latin America, both because they're concerned about hostile foreign powers and transnational criminals, but also because of the soft power movements that we have seen be very successful in Latin America. You go to Latin America today, and in their major cities, their transit systems, their energy grids, their infrastructure is Chinese funded and Chinese owned, and it's been incredibly successful. When we think about the U.S.'s positioning in this hemisphere, they're in a very weak position relative to how China has succeeded in creating influence. So I'm not taking a side on this, I'm just stating what the perspective of the U.S. government in Washington is. So what does this also mean? It means that while you have governments in place that are really just cartels or fronts to cartels, you don't have regional partners. You cannot negotiate with Mexico or Mexico's president because she has to turn around and negotiate with the cartels and then come back to you for an answer. You cannot negotiate with Maduro because, again, Maduro doesn't answer to the Venezuelan people or to the other political figures in the country. He answers to the cartel, which is more like a federation and a mob, right? It's not like he's going to get voted out of power, because it is not a democracy. He has been voted out of power twice, and that has not kept him from staying in power. So, U.S. perspective. This is a traditional approach to using law enforcement to deal with insurgent enemies. And this is how the U.S. is going to address the Venezuela problem and the focus towards a Western hemisphere that is stable through the removal of these, cartels and the complete, ideally the complete destruction of them and the power that they hold over these different Latin American regions. Now, why is this so particularly important when we think about Venezuela and the Western Hemisphere in general? From my perspective, it's pretty clear. We need, meaning the United States, needs a nearshoring industry. We need to encourage U.S. companies to move their supply chains out of China and into places like Latin America. This both enhances our economic ties with these countries, but also reduces China's leverage in the region. We also know and see that China has been building in Latin America again, telecom networks. In fact, in Mexico, this is well known, in Chile as well as partnering with Russia and Iran to establish more covert networks. This is a problem for the United States, both from a security perspective, but again, a soft power perspective in the region as well. The other highlight is obviously energy security. Venezuela sits on the world's largest proven oil reserves, and for decades was a major oil supplier to the United States, especially for the heavy crude that is refined in the Gulf Coast. Washington now views Venezuela's oil as both a threat when used by Maduro to fund his regime or by Russia and China to gain influence, and as a potential opportunity. If Venezuela returns to democracy, its oil and natural gas sector would be reintegrated into the global market. This will stabilize and ease energy prices and reduce the West's dependence on other hostile producers. We already saw a hint of this recently when the U.S. issued limited licenses for companies to pump Venezuelan oil in exchange for humanitarian concessions, a sign that energy considerations are very much on the table. So, yeah, the U.S. perspective is really a strategic stance. Venezuela is really not just about human rights or democracy. It's really about the core U.S. interest and the focus on the Western Hemisphere. By indicting Venezuela's leaders as narco-criminals, deploying assets to interdict drug shipments, and rallying other partners in the hemisphere, this tone is clear that they are no longer negotiating with the regime, and that the status quo in the region is no longer being accepted by this administration. So, the crossroads. On one side, we have the Venezuelan people who are exhausted of years of oppression and economic agony, still yearning for change. And on the other side, we have the United States and much of the international community, which is intensifying efforts to force a resolution. The convergence of these pressures could finally crack the stalemate, or if mishandled, could lead to worse instability. Let's frame this current moment in terms of threats and opportunities. First, Venezuela as a threat. From the U.S. and regional perspective, the current Venezuelan regime poses multiple dangers. It has proven willing to partner with narco-terrorists and cartels, effectively becoming a state sponsor for drug trade. The flood of Venezuelan cocaine in partnership with the Colombian FARC and the entrenched Mexican cartels distributing it northwards is seen as a toxic scourge fueling America's opiate and crime epidemics. Moreover, Venezuela under Maduro has been a hub for money laundering, a source of regional corruption and buying influence or aiding illicit groups. It is also a gateway for powers outside of our hemisphere, like China, Russia, and Iran, to gain footholds in the America. For example, the Maduro regime, isolated by U.S. sanctions, deepened its ties with U.S.'s rivals. They now rely on Russian banks and Chinese loans. They also are using Iranian-linked networks. All of this is ringing alarm bells in Washington. And the National Security Strategy Report explicitly calls out the hostile foreign incursion in our hemisphere, as well as the concerns around adversaries owning key regional assets. In short, a lawless anti-American Venezuela is viewed as a serious security liability right in our neighborhood. On the other hand, there is Venezuela as the opportunity. If change comes, then the US and allies see a chance for energy realignment. We could have less reliance on Russia for oil, as well as the economic opportunity within Venezuela itself, where rebuilding its economy could create new markets for the US and regional businesses, and could tie into the nearshoring trend, including agriculture, mineral refinement, and partnerships with Western firms instead of Chinese companies. So all of this is really a regional reintegration, a welcoming back of Venezuela back into the institutions in this hemisphere. So I'll kind of just stop there. I do have maybe one more quick thing. This was from the speech given by the chair of the Norwegian Nobel Committee. So this was on the 10th of December. If you haven't watched the video, I really do recommend it. One of the, yeah, I'll just read this because I think it's important to understand these stories and the situation. So again, this is in context of the Nobel Peace Prize winner. So Samantha Sofia Hernandez, a girl of 16, was brutally abducted last month by masked members of the Maduro regime security forces. She was taken from the home of her grandparents, and where she is now we don't know. Probably in one of the dictatorship's detention centers. She may be with her father, who disappeared without a trace in January. What had they done wrong? Her brother was a soldier, but refused to follow the regime's orders to commit brutal acts against the population. For that offense, the entire family must be punished. Juan Requences is ordered to turn slowly towards the camera. The video shows him standing with a dazed look as if in a fog, wearing underwear stained with excrement. He had supposedly confessed to planning a coup, but of course there is no proof. The day before his arrest, Juan stood before the National Assembly. He gave a speech in which he repeated one key sentence, a promise to his country and to himself: I refuse to give up. Alfredo Diaz, an opposition leader and former mayor, was pulled from a bus last November and thrown into the depths of El Helicoide. Now, El Helicoide is a large structure in Caracas that is thought to be, and most likely is, the largest torture center in this hemisphere. It is where people are taken and tortured.
What's it called again?
El Helicoide. Helicoide. This is Latin America's largest torture chamber. One more political prisoner in a long line of others. This week came news of his death. Another life gone, another victim of the regime. These stories are not unique. This is Venezuela today. It is how the Venezuelan regime treats its own people, a sister, a student, a politician. Anyone who still believes in stating the truth out loud may disappear violently into a system built specifically to eradicate this belief. Samantha, Juan, and Alfredo were not extremists. They were ordinary Venezuelans dreaming of freedom, democracy, and rights. For this, their lives were stolen from them. Under this regime, children are not spared. More than 200 children were arrested after the election in 2024. The United Nations documented their experiences as follows: plastic bags pulled tight over their heads, electric shocks to the genitals, blows to the body so brutal that it was hard to breathe, sexualized violence, cells so cold as to cause intense shivering, foul drinking water teeming with insects, screams that no one came to stop. One child lay in the dark whispering his mother's name over and over in hope that she would not believe he was dead. A 16-year-old boy eventually came home, so ravaged by electric shocks and beatings that he could not hug his mother without pain shooting through his body. For months, he jumped at every sound and barely slept. At night, he would wake with a jolt, convinced that soldiers were back to resume their attacks. As we sit here in Oslo City Hall, innocent people are locked away in dark cells in Venezuela. They cannot hear the speeches given today, only the screams of prisoners being tortured. This is how authoritarian powers try to crush those who stand up for democracy. The United Nations has declared these acts to be crimes against humanity. This is the regime of Nicolás Maduro. Venezuela has evolved into a brutal authoritarian state facing a deep humanitarian and economic crisis. Meanwhile, a small elite at the top, shielded by political power, weapons, and legal impunity, enriches itself. A quarter of the population has already fled the country, one of the world's largest refugee crises. Those who remain live under a regime that systematically silences, harasses, and attacks the opposition. Venezuela is not alone in this darkness. The world is on the wrong track, and the authoritarians are gaining. We must ask the inconvenient question: why is it so hard for us to preserve democracy, a form of government that was conceived to protect our freedom and peace? When democracy loses, the result is more conflict, more violence, and more war. We go on to, I think, a key part here. Okay, yeah. At the heart of the battle for democracy shines a simple truth. Democracy is more than a form of government. It is also a basis for lasting peace. Millions of Venezuelans know this. Year after year, students, trade unions, journalists, business groups, and ordinary citizens have mobilized in waves of resistance. They have filled the streets in protest. When their votes were taken away, they banged pots and pans. When state surveillance is inescapable, they whisper. People across the political spectrum, from communists to conservatives, have risen to challenge the regime. The opposition has tried one strategy after another. Through it all, they have said, we strive not for revenge, but for justice, for the sanctity of the ballot box, for democracy and for peace. But they are told in reply that those things are impossible, that they will fail. And when Venezuelans asked the world to pay attention, we turned away. As they lost their rights, their food, their health, and their security, and eventually their own futures, much of the world stuck to old narratives. Some insisted Venezuela was an ideal egalitarian society. Others wanted only to see a struggle against imperialism. Still, others chose to interpret Venezuelan reality as a contest between superpowers, overlooking the bravery of those who seek freedom in their own country. What all these observers have in common is this: the moral betrayal of those who actually live under this brutal regime. If you only support people who share your political views, you have understood neither democracy nor freedom. Yet many critics stop there. They see local democratic forces cooperating by necessity with actors they dislike, and use that to justify withholding support. This puts ideological conviction ahead of human solidarity. How should we regard those who use all their energy finding fault with the hard choices that brave defenders of democracy have had to make, instead of recognizing their courage and their sacrifice, or asking how we too can help fight dictatorship? It is easy to stand on principle when someone else's freedom is at stake. But no democracy movement operates in ideal circumstances. Activist leaders must confront and resolve dilemmas that we onlookers are free to ignore. People living under dictatorship often have to choose between the difficult and the impossible. Yet many of us from a safe distance expect Venezuela's democratic leaders to pursue their aims with the moral purity their opponents never display. This is unrealistic, it is unfair, and it shows ignorance of history. So I'll stop there because I think that was very key to this conversation.
Okay, wonderful, thanks. So just a housekeeping announcement. There is wine and other alcoholic drinks over there. You can go over at any time and get them, or you can ask me now to bring them to you.
Will you eventually make your amazing coffee?
And the coffee's just been made.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Right. Do you want coffee?
Later, I'll get my own, yeah.
Jenny?
There's the Croy in the fridge too, right?
There's all kinds of things in the fridge that you don't know about.
I think that I need you to respond. First off, one of the things I heard you say is your sanctions really didn't make a difference. It was the collapse of the economy, but you haven't responded more recently to bombing boats in international waters, or I guess taking control of an oil ship that was on its way to Iran and taking charge of it, and I have to hear you address that.
I don't know any of the specifics, obviously, more than anybody else does about, you know, the bombings when it comes to the boats. One can hope that they actually were traffickers, and not, you know, fishermen and things like this. And I think that it would not be, I don't think it would be a surprise to anybody that there were or won't be unintended consequences with any kind of regime change in Venezuela. However, when you look at the current situation, we have over 25% of the country in exile. We have people tortured by the thousands. We have the vast majority of a country living in poverty. I don't see a world in which perpetuating that state or allowing it to continue to exist is better than some sort of military intervention from another foreign power. And I think that is the, again, difficult choice between the impossible, right? How can Venezuela transition to a democracy without some sort of military action? And whenever there is war, there is violence, and that is just the reality of a regime change.
Why don't you let the regional people take care of it? There's plenty of countries that can handle that.
Who?
Brazil, Argentina, Mexico, come on, help me, Chile.
You made the claim.
There's a whole bunch of them. It's their region. Why don't they?
You're
take
in the
care of
region.
war?
The United States is the
No,
region.
we are. We're an oil consumer. We're only interested in oil.
And in the mass migration of people that come here. You change the regime there, and all of the people that we are now looking to deport in this country will go back happily. None of the Venezuelans that you will find in Chicago today are here and don't want to go back.
Trump ain't going to give up. He's going to stay in office as long as he can because he knows he's in trouble. Maduro's going to stay in office. Putin's going to stay in office because they know the dude in Israel is going to stay in as long as they can because they know they're all in trouble. So they will be dictators for life.
And then
That's reality.
Yeah, I mean,
Maduro will be in there forever.
I'd hope not. I don't think so.
Well, if they had a regional, see, America can't be trusted. If you had a regional war group of countries handling Venezuela, that would be much better. I think they're trying to do that in the Middle East.
So Argentina and Chile and Brazil are trusted then, countries that have had recent dictatorships. The U.S. hasn't had a recent dictatorship, as far as I know.
No.
The countries that have had actual dictatorships and genocides should be trusted then with a regime change in Venezuela, because that's logical. I think you're acting like this place is so far from where you live when it's right in your backyard. And you want to say that we're in the United States and we're so far from it when it's our neighbor.
The United States is really small. We're like 5% of the world population. We're not that big anymore.
In this hemisphere. We're talking about the Western Hemisphere. We're talking about...
But we're only in it for financial. We don't really.
Well, hold on.
how do you know that for sure?
I have
We're
addressed...
just in it for the money.
Well, I have addressed that. I've said that. I've said that the U.S.'s perspective is the financial opportunity.
Which means we'll take over all their sicko gifts.
As if we're a democracy and people there, if we go back to where we were pre-Chavez, where yes, most European and Western governments were getting the lion's share of the revenue, but people in Venezuela could live freely, I would do that. I would be happy to become another Puerto Rico if my friends and my family weren't at threat of being tortured. I would be fine with being a vassal state.
Wait,
Let's look at this- let's look
the
at
chair,
this timeline.
the chair, time out, the chair is,
Chavez started in 98,
Wait a second.
right?
Hang on.
time out,
When
the
did
chair
he-
is calling, order.
No, we need that to, nobody knows this. I don't know it.
but we have plenty of time. I wanna kinda circulate it around, there's other people who have
That's what I said I
questions.
was gonna ask.
Eric, motioned to me earlier. He had a question or something he wanted to.
Thank you. Yeah, my question is about the democracy. We keep saying this word democracy. To me, it's like very abstract. Because to me, I think what I can see, Venezuela, the number one problem is hunger. This economy. And democracy is great if that's what you prefer. You know, I have different value system, but if you prefer democracy, I'm not in a position to say no, right? But I want to point out that democracy, well, isn't that easier to solve your hunger problem, starvation problem? Then when it's solved, then we'll probably aim for democracy. Instead of just, oh, we want democracy, and democracy will automatically go back to solve starvation.
The reason
that's my question.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
so the reason democracy is critical to that is when you don't have a democracy, there is I'm not saying a democracy creates perfect accountability, but in a democracy, there's a level of accountability that says if you stop feeding your people, you're no longer in power. In the current state, where you have an authoritarian regime who does not allow its country to prosper, does not care about the well-being of its citizens, does not do anything in the interest of its people, then they're not a democracy. There's no accountability to then say, well, these people don't feed us. We better vote them out next time it comes around. So the democracy creates a certain just base level of accountability to say, we want people in power that are going to allow us to feed ourselves. And I'll give you a real example of this. Mm-hmm. When I was in Venezuela, I had a small business out of my apartment with my dad and my mom, where we made frozen pizzas. And we had a lot of demand. Frozen pizzas were pretty popular in bars and things like this because they wouldn't have to pay a cook. And what happened was, as we bought more raw goods, meaning just flour and things like this, we actually had to pay more per kilo than if we were buying a small amount. Now, this is completely illogical, right? Usually when you buy in bulk, you pay lower prices.
Right.
The problem is you have to bribe the distributor, has to bribe an official from the government who's monitoring how much the distributor sells. Because if the distributor gets too big, the government will seize all their assets and it becomes a national benefit. And that is what happened with every industry in Venezuela, and why there's no food. The reason that the oil prices resulted in the mass starvation and the shortage of goods and led to me eating ketchup and beans for a couple weeks because there was no food, is because there was no national production of goods within Venezuela. All of the industries had been either stripped of their assets or simply told, you can't grow that big, or if you do, we're going to take your entire company. And so democracy is the first step in order to creating a system of some standard of accountability. If we had an authoritarian regime that cared about the well-being of its people, sure, that's fine. We wouldn't be having the conversation. But we have one that doesn't. And so we have a proven system that creates some level standard of accountability that is democracy.
Right,
and that is the quickest path to getting people
break it down for you? Instead of a big leap to democracy, democracy doesn't automatically solve all the problems, or even majority of the problems.
No.
There are very crappy democracy in the world, so that's what I mean by democracy. The world is abstract. We want, given Venezuela's situation, we want some concrete, something we can accomplish like relatively fast to solve the most urgent problem. To me, it's not democracy, any kind of democracy. Besides, not to mention, democracy can create another set of problems. So why don't we have, I'm just hypothetically, right? Now you have a back dictator. Why don't we have a benign dictator? That sort of thing. I'm just throwing out one example. Any example other than just big leap to democracy.
Yeah.
Then you solve the starvation problem.
In my opinion, the best case scenario for Venezuela is that there is a military action on behalf of Venezuela by the United States. As soon as a leader is put into place in Venezuela, the Venezuelan military ceases to exist, similar to Costa Rica. That is the only way that they will actually stabilize the region, because as soon as the U.S. steps out of that equation, there will be a military coup. And you can get another Pinochet or another sort of dictatorship like we saw, I'm forgetting the name right now, in Argentina. Military,
Perón.
Perón. And so, you want to avoid that situation. And so to me, again, the priority is obviously feeding people, but also giving some base standard of life where you're not at threat of being, tortured, killed, or having to flee because there simply is just such bad economic conditions.
Right. To me, if you solve the starvation problem, you don't have the urgency to flee, so you won't be tortured. But that's down the road, right? Now there's to solve the starvation problem, so you pin your hopes on the U.S. and it's a good chance. It's a good chance.
There's no other hope, though, right? That's the thing.
Well, we'll figure out. But I'm pointing out that what's at hand, which is the hopes on the U.S. U.S. is composed of corporate interest,
Yeah.
American
We're
corporate
not
interest.
trusted.
Yeah.
So if you trust in American corporate interest to solve your own problem, it may or may not get there. Maybe you want 100, they gave you 30. Well, still better than 0, right? Or maybe it's not 30, maybe it's 0 or even less. We don't know. And we don't know, but we look at history. We look at other examples, say how credible that is, right? We can discuss that. I'm just pointing out all the points. Because when I hear democracy, I was like, let's talk about something more practical. Okay, it's your ideal. I don't dispute that. It's not my ideal, but I don't dispute your ideal.
Let me give you the metaphor I've been trying to give people. Imagine you live in a mansion with your family, large, beautiful estate, and there are people who have kidnapped you within your own home and have you at knife point every single day. Somebody is outside saying, I can help you, but you're going to give me 70% of the estate you live on. Are you going to let them help you, or are you going to stay under knife point and say, I'm going to see how this pans out?
Okay, did you ask me a question? Can I answer? If I'm not starved, if I have like a stable source of food,
You are starved.
I will no. If that problem is solved, I will be less motivated, or I would probably think twice if I want to do something that will get me arrested or killed.
So the reality is
Right?
you are starved. There is nobody in the house to save you other than yourself, but you have no weapons. And so you either leave the entire estate, right, so you get nothing, or you keep 30% of it and you get to live.
Maybe I'll give it a chance, right? Someone's
Exactly.
willing to help, right?
Exactly.
I'm just alerting people. If it disappoints you, you better have a plan B. That's what I'm saying. But the thing is, so I go back to my theme. Democracy, you have to be prepared to be disappointed by it, or even have a even more like counterproductive effect. You have to be prepared for that.
Western Europe's fine.
Yeah,
Democracies.
in a life and death situation, though, again, which is what it is, that is where, unfortunately, you just don't have the cards to play anything else. And so I go back, which I like in this speech that is addressed, choosing between what is difficult and the impossible. We are in an impossible situation from the Venezuelan perspective. And then you must make the difficult choice of partnering or giving other things in concession for basic standard freedom. Just basic standard ability to live in your country, yes, with problems, yes, with corporate interest, but all of those new problems pale in comparison to the decades of oppression that people are living on and will continue to live on under.
I hear you.
And now wait, Tom, and now the chair recognizes David.
Yeah, this is a rare moment. I'm very surprised. And you've made me seriously consider supporting an example of American intervention. Because generally, I have a knee-jerk opposition to American intervention, which is often disastrous and so on. But this sounds like a good case, and I'm not dogmatic about it. So you forced me to reconsider my ideas on this, and that's always good. I'm curious about what Venezuela was. You've made me curious. I didn't used to be. I'm curious about what Venezuela was like before Hugo Chavez. It was a democracy. It was prosperous. What was the cause of that changing?
So we have a saying in Venezuela that is, when we were rich and we didn't know it. The problem is the politicians in Venezuela pre-Chavez were known as ADECO and COPEI. And so you had two political parties that were both pretty much what you would consider here center-right and right. Venezuela's historically been more conservative, let's say.
Can you
It has a
translate
strong-
those two words you just said?
Which ones?
The ones that I didn't understand.
Oh, they're just like the acronyms for the political parties.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah, but they both, one of them was more center-right, and one of them
Okay,
was more
gotcha,
right.
gotcha.
So more conservative, but Venezuela, because of having a very long history of military tradition, as well as having a dictatorship for many years, it still has some of these things. It leans more conservative. Anyways, with that, in that system, you had corruption. You had, people in power that, when you voted and people got into office, you felt very similar to how people felt here voting for a Dick Cheney or for a Hillary Clinton. You said, well, I'd either get, this politician, life politician or that life politician, and, it's good. They're both, kind of the same thing at the end of the day, right? And you have this populist who comes in and says, quite literally, very much like Trump,
On day one.
fuck all of this, make Venezuela great again, and we shouldn't be giving anything away to anybody else, we need to be very aggressive in negotiating with other countries, and all of this stuff. And so pre-Chavez, you had a country that was economically stable, had a problems, you could say, that were standard, I guess, for your kind of post-dictatorship kind of country, right? Whether you still had a lot of politicians that were making, back-channel deals with corporations to give away national interest versus actually investing that money back into the state or back into, the people. And you did see a lot of kind of just in abuse of, let's say, those corporate interests, right? You knew that corporate interests came first before the citizens, for sure.
Was Chavez brutal like Maduro? I don't think so.
Not as much, no. There was
Not nearly
definitely,
as much.
no. And in fact, me personally, I think Chavez came into power with very good intentions and meant to keep all of the illicit stuff on the down, on the down low as much as possible, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
I think, though, he needed the support from these other actors, including Diosdado Cabello, Tariq El-Assami, people with Tariq El-Assami in particular, who was a figure within the state. I can't remember his position right now, but he's had, you could say like attorney general and then vice president and things like this, ties to the Iranian government, things like this. I think that Chavez knew he needed support from some of these other folks, and I think that got ahead of him, to be honest with
And
you.
he was only around 5 years, right?
Chavez?
Yeah.
No, he was around until 2013, I want to say. So
15 years?
he would have been, yeah,
Really?
at least 3.
Maduro's only 10 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Oh, it's
because I was in Venezuela when Chavez died, so yeah, it would have been 2013.
So I went to a Democratic Socialist of America meeting with at the time he was the Chicago alderman Carlos Rodriguez Lopez and Rosanna.
Rodriguez Sanchez.
Rosanna, yeah, okay, thank you. And maybe a couple others. And I had brought up I had confronted the alderman at this meeting, which was put on by the city of Evanston. And the city of Evanston has yet to put on a meeting for the Libertarian Party. But anyways, I had asked Alderman Rodriguez Lopez, what do you think about, like Maduro and his reaction was, oh, well, they were elected and therefore, the poor people like them, therefore they're great. And then I recently saw Lopez again prior to his resignation as alderman, and I asked him, this was, I guess there was an election about a year or so ago.
2024, yeah.
And I asked, hey, who do you prefer win? And all he said to me was like, hey, thanks, Justin. Like he didn't even acknowledge like. So what can you kind of and then there are people like Oliver Stone, people like Sean Penn, who did a fine job in the movie One Battle After Another. A lot of these people were singing the praises of the Chavez regime. Can you offer some insight into Western gullibility and?
I think people want to take their reality and project it onto other societies, right? And so, Chavez, and you see this in general, but these enterprises, they know that. They know that they can gain support by saying, I'm a democratic, or I'm a socialist, and therefore everyone who happens to like the word socialism in the United States will agree with me, right? And so, let me say this. When Venezuelans come here and don't vote, let's say for a leftist politician because Venezuela was socialist, I think that's very stupid of the Venezuelan, because they didn't experience socialism in Venezuela. They experienced an authoritarian regime that calls itself socialist in order to stay in power and in order to give itself this guise that it was actually, something that it wasn't. So now, again, I'm not saying that socialism works or doesn't. I'm just saying that is, they're hoodwinking, people, right? So you can call yourself it, but it's not that. You know what I'm saying? So that's kind of my perspective.
Sort of like
Miami are kind of stupid.
Sort of like you can call yourself anti-fascist, but that doesn't actually mean that you are against fascism.
Antifa.
Yeah. Antifa.
Yeah. So I mean, it's just kind of like.
So do you think that Maduro is totally bereft of any sincere political ideology?
Oh, absolutely. He's not an ideologue at all. Chavez was an ideologue.
Can I have a
for
question?
Sure.
Yeah, I'll hit you, and then I'm going to hit Eric after you.
You had a choice already. Okay, thank you. So me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so Venezuela they're arresting migrants, they're arresting student activists, they're arresting union people, they have drug cartels, they have a mafia. Muchas gracias for the speech. Chavez was a populist. Was Maduro a populist?
Oh, I see where this is going.
No, I wouldn't say so.
So Chavez was a populist. Trump is a populist.
There it is.
Yeah.
Okay, so U.S., they're arresting migrants, they're arresting student activists, they're arresting union people, they're deporting people to El Salvador, to Cuba, to wherever there's a prison. So, would you say America is a fascist state?
I would say that under this administration, there is a high risk of the similar sort of issues that led to Venezuela's current situation. Mm-hmm. Again, it doesn't matter. Trump could change his policies entirely tomorrow. The precedence that is set is what's dangerous. Because of the politicizing of the courts, because of the trying to force a constitutional crisis. Mm-hmm. That is mm-hmm. what Chavez pushed the court systems in Venezuela to a breaking point, mm-hmm. as well as pushed the legislative branch into a crisis mode where there was no other answer but to call a constitutional crisis and rewrite the Constitution, which mm-hmm. resulted in Chavez staying in power. And so you see similar things with this current administration where, for me, again, it doesn't matter if they do it, it's the precedence that is set that makes it dangerous, because it's the next person in power, left, right, really doesn't matter. The fact is it sets a precedence that says you can push a country's system to its breaking point, force a constitutional crisis, and if you've got the right people in the Supreme Court and the right people in the House and in the Congress, you can rewrite the rules entirely. And that is what Chavez did, and so I think that is the problem with administrations that seek to push a system to its breaking points.
Another thing, the socialist business. Chavez was a socialist, and Nazis called themselves socialists. So it's a common thing, I think.
Yeah, I mean, so here's what Chavez did. Chavez said, and the reason that he called himself a socialist, is he said, instead of corporations running our industries, we're going to nationalize all of our industries and have the best agriculture industry, let's say, for example. And so all of these companies, their assets right now in Venezuela, car manufacturing, agriculture, they're worth, let's say, $3 billion or something like this. So we're going to seize all those assets. Now the state has $3 billion. We're going to take that $3 billion and we're going to put this person in charge of it, and they're going to, in 10 years, have the biggest agricultural firm in the world ever, because it's no longer a corporate interest, it's for the people, by the people. Mm-hmm. You know where all that money went? Into their pockets, into real estate in New York, into real estate in Miami, into real estate in Europe. All of the luxuries and the money that was stolen from the state. And so, can you really call that socialism? You know, it's done under the guise of socialism because it gives the state the power to seize assets and then put it under the control of the state, and then they steal it. Now, he could have been a socialist authoritarian or a socialist, let's say, who then actually did invest $3 billion into some state-run agriculture and feed all of Venezuela and all of Latin America. That could have been an outcome. It's just not the outcome that happened because there was more interest in stealing the money than anything else.
Eric, you were gonna...
Yeah, I have a kind of simpler technical question. As you mentioned, sounded to me like the critical point, a turning point was when Venezuela, like early on, maybe early in Chavez administration, that somehow the oil production reduced. What was the cause, and what is stopping it from ramping it back up?
The same problem, which was that they had corporations that ran everything before. So actually, there's a myth that Chavez nationalized oil production. Oil production in Venezuela has been nationalized since like the 70s. What Chavez changed was he took corporations out of the actual operational side of things of the oil production industry, and said the state will now manage that. And so they seized all those assets and then said, here, we're going to run it now. And it was just mismanaged, and the money was stolen. And that is, again, evidenced by the millions and billions that these people are worth. That is just knowledge and true because of the assets the U.S. and other countries have seized and said, hey, what are all these, $200 million apartments that you guys own in New York, and $20 million homes in Miami that some politician in Venezuela owns? Where did you get that money on a salary of $15,000 a year? And so that is the oil production collapse is mismanagement and not maintaining things. Like it just is as simple as you spend a decade just keeping things at a bare minimum and high oil prices that cover up your tracks. Mm-hmm. As soon as oil prices come down, you're left. Tide came back out, or tide went back out, and you've got no swimsuit, right?
Yeah, but okay, we'll talk about sanction that's very related to oil production and sale. How do you look at the sanction? Does it hurt the regime more, or the hurt the people more, or equally? Or how come it hasn't seemed to work? The regime has been sustaining the sanction for quite a long time. And that's not how sanction was meant to do, right? They probably expect reasonably sanction will work in 2 years or 3 years, not a decade. That means it probably will never work. Yeah. How do you look at this? Do you think sanction is worth kept in place because it hurts people too?
Yeah, no, it hurts the people for sure. I think it is evidence that if the country, supposedly, from the sanctions, should have no revenue coming in, but yet is able to pay to keep in power, then where is that money coming from? The money is coming from drug trafficking. No, the money is coming from the drug trafficking, the weapons trafficking, and the partnerships with the Iranians, with the Russians, and with the Chinese. Mm-hmm. And actually, the Chinese in this case, they don't care at all about who's in power in Venezuela. They really don't.
It's not they don't care, they're agnostic.
Yes, they are agnostic. Yeah, that's a better representation. there are documented cases, and anecdotally, I am aware of some cases where Iranians were given Venezuelan passports in Venezuela that I have, knowledge of.
Yeah, because if let's say if we lift the sanction, and let's say you lift the sanction, you increase the total benefit for Venezuela as a country is 100. If it like they're so corrupt and they're so dishonest, 80 will go to those dishonest officials,
Yes.
But at least 20 will go to the people. You think it's worth doing?
I don't think it's not really going to the people. I can't say what percentage, but at least when I lived there, you don't rely on the state for anything there. You cannot rely on the state for anything there. Meaning, there is no benefit, right? Let me give you the example. The way that the state operates. Let's talk about the sanctions in the context of, okay, the government would have money to then import food because there's no national production of food, or not enough to feed all the people, right? The way that they handle that is that they go and they buy food from Brazil. The officials who are then responsible for doling out the food will give it to a store, okay, and the government-run store. And the government-run store employees will then be saying that the shelves are empty, but they'll be outside on the block reselling to you what should cost some super subsidized price, but at the real imported price, or 10 times the price. So the person, really, me, either way, I'm getting fucked over. You see how like the corruption really is in every stage of that transit, right? Money comes in,
I see the system.
food's imported,
It
it's all state run, and then the people in the store are also hungry, and they're like, I can take that milk and I can sell it on my corner for 10 times what it's being sold on this shelf here.
Yeah. Scalpers.
And they pay off the manager of the store by saying, I'm going to take all this milk, I'm going to go sell it at 10 times the price in the wealthy neighborhood. And when the poor people come, we're going to say that the shelves are empty and we're sold out, unless they got money to pay. And that's the reality there.
I know. Okay, that's the system's kind of, it does just, things doesn't go through.
Yeah, because it's all state run.
Okay, I have a friend. Oh, this is the last question, because it's a very curious one. A friend of mine, actually it's my wife's friend. He's now in Venezuela. He's in his 60s. His father's in his 90s. Every time we have a call, like we have a gathering, he will call. Oh, I'm in the swimming pool. I have a girlfriend. He seems to be the top, like 0.1%. He seems to have no worry. The swimming pool, he has no worry. That I know. He sometimes came to the U.S. Actually, he lived in Chicago for a long time. But now, because his father is old, so he wants to be with his father, despite the situation in Venezuela. But while he was there, he's just like, oh, well, maybe the electricity will be outage for a few hours, but he's a swimming pool.
Yeah.
How do you? And by the way, he hates Trump. He hates China. He hates the regime, the Maduro. To me, it's just too many contradictions.
Yeah.
I miss a lot, tons of detail. So glad you're here. Can probably enlighten a little bit.
I mean, I could go. Well, maybe not right now because of the flights, but for example, I could go to Venezuela, and because I'm coming with U.S. dollars, I could have the time of my life. In fact, I would love to. The real threat there and problem is the risk of political violence. There used to be a real crime situation in Venezuela as well. Just regular crime. Like I was robbed at gunpoint 3 times, knife point once.
Ooh.
It's very common.
Wow,
That
makes you a tough guy, man.
Yeah, you got street cred.
Yeah.
It's like Chicago.
I mean, at the end, it's the other end of the barrel. I mean, it's not something that I have experienced.
It's a
Violent
bit
crime
worse than Chicago.
It's pretty.
No one's ever
pretty
held me
common.
up at gunpoint or knife point.
Thank you.
I was held up once, but it was just by beating me around about the head.
Oh,
And that was
In Chicago?
No, in London.
So, tough
So
guy too.
London is
You look
worse
pretty
than
tough.
New York or Chicago.
So-
So,
It is now, I'm sure, yeah.
now though, actually,
Guns out on the street.
there really is a huge reduction in crime in Venezuela. Huge reduction, and this is interesting. Back when there was a lot of international pressure for the Maduro regime to stabilize the country. Number one, the first sanctions that came through in 2017, they went into the neighborhoods where they knew a lot of the kind of like these gangs organized, and nobody really cried for these people, but the state murdered criminals. Like they said, we're getting a lot of bad publicity and we could start facing more international pressure, and if we don't reduce the crime situation. And they literally went into neighborhoods, poor neighborhoods, and just murdered young men.
Who they thought would be criminals?
Yeah. Or that were criminals. And they sent the military, and the Sebi in particular, and just murdered criminals. As well as, which is true,
Innocent.
sent a lot of people out of Venezuela and said, go be a criminal in Colombia. Go be a criminal in Chile. Don't do it here.
And in the US.
And in the United
I was
States.
just about to say.
So,
Flushing the toilet.
that is true. And so I could go to Venezuela and barring the political, risk of political violence, I'd have a great time. You go on Instagram, I mean, it's beautiful. It is still actually beautiful country. That's just not the reality of most of the people. You have a fraction of the society, and then people that are there doing, tourism, who are able to access all of those things that still exist, for sure. There's kind of two realities, that are lived there, right? So, yeah, I mean, if I went there with dollars, I'd have the time of my life. It's actually quite expensive, to be honest with you. More expensive than going to Miami, because everything's imported. Like I have, my dad, he's remarried, and he goes to Venezuela, and has been in the last year. And, I don't know, buying, let's say a beer is like $12 at a restaurant. This is expensive, because everything's imported.
Pond there still?
It's like going to the AMC.
Yeah.
All right, Corinna?
Well, David had asked you about what Venezuela was like pre-Chavez, and you talked about the duopoly. How did you get into a state of mainly having your whole economy be oil, and can you see your economy being more diversified? You had briefly mentioned agriculture. How do you part of your issue is a monoculture economy.
Yeah, well, it wasn't that before. In fact, oil used to not be the primary money maker for Venezuela. We used to have car manufacturing, agriculture industry. We fed a huge amount of Brazil, a huge amount of Colombia. When all of those industries' assets, right, these corporations that own these industries, were stripped and owned by the state, that ceased to be a thing, right? And over time, the mismanagement led to where we are now. But Venezuela is not just an oil-rich country, right? It is a country that has the capacity for huge amounts of agricultural output, both evidenced by the past, and just in terms of actual...
What's the agriculture?
What was that, I'm sorry?
What is the agriculture?
Livestock and farming, like, berries, everything from berries to mangoes to, tropical fruits, things like this.
You don't have the cereals like corn or wheat, or particularly?
I'm not as familiar with that. I am familiar with the livestock.
Is it like beef and stuff?
Beef. We used to have huge amounts of
mouth
livestock.
watering right now, actually.
Yeah.
Venezuelan beef.
And car manufacturing was a huge thing. Just actual manufacturing used to be a very large thing in Venezuela, like raw goods. Like my grandmother, she had all she would do was, what is it called, a t-shirt production, so like a textile factory. So everything from like textile processing to metal, like kind of metal processing, and, the manufacturing industries used to be very big in Venezuela.
Okay.
And that was, it had a diversified economy. It was not an oil. It wasn't dependent on the oil to be rich, let's say.
Do you have any raw materials? Any like rare earth minerals or any gold, silver, copper?
Yeah. So this has become a major also revenue source for the regime, especially with a lot of the new kind of minerals that have become, more important. But we do have a huge amount of gold. And so there's a lot of illegal mining operations that are currently being done in Venezuela as well.
You talk about manufacturing leaving the country. U.S., what happened? Manufacturing left. Went to Mexico, China, Taiwan.
Kind of under Clinton, yeah.
Probably some of it went to Venezuela.
Yes?
maybe.
Justin, you had something?
I was back.
So, but you're familiar with Batman and all that stuff, right? You know, so the key, I think, theme of these stories with Batman is you need virtuous people to run society, or else you get Gotham City.
Yes.
And so, can you compare the U.S. and Venezuela in terms of like how? I guess, you know, like if people, you know, were more virtuous and elected virtuous people to represent them, would you have a Chavez Maduro? What makes the United States and other democracies different? Mm-hmm. How can some democracies don't devolve into totalitarianism?
Yeah. So this is actually a very this has a term in Venezuela, and it's called the vivencia criolla, and it's a term used to describe the people who seek out bribes, the people who will give their kid's professor a bottle of whiskey so that he'll, you know, pass their kid instead of flunk them, the people who will find a way to cut in line, the people who want to figure out how to cheat the system. And so that culture has a lot of deep roots in colonialism, because the colonial system itself was one that benefited a small few. And so when you have a system that benefits a small few, people have to come up with their own system in order to get ahead. And that creates a culture where people are thinking that way, because if you don't, you get left behind, right? And so you need to, the biggest fundamental problem in this situation and in any other with Venezuela in particular, is rewriting those cultural norms that have become ingrained over the last 20 years. And so moving away from that sort of, I got to find how to bribe somebody, or I got to figure out this because the system just doesn't work, so I have to make up my own. Rewriting those cultural norms is a huge, huge hurdle, and I think is part of a factor that contributes to these problems.
What did you call the phrase again? I'm doing Duolingo. So.
Vivencia criolla.
What does that mean? Translated into English. Literally.
Creole living.
Creole living.
Yeah.
So there's like a negative connotation to
No.
Creole.
No, it's not like negative, or it's not, in English it sounds derogatory, but it's not derogatory. It just is meant the living of those who are mixed between the kind of poor, you could say like
Maybe hybrid.
I guess being, it's not street smart. I'm trying to think of what the term in English would be. I could probably ask ChatGPT to do a better job of translating it. It's just the
Indigenous?
not indigenous. It's like
An attitude.
people being like. Here, let me see what ChatGPT comes up with. We can.
Google does.
I was going to ask a follow-up on, you know, we have to, like, change the norms or something to get away from this. Because what you're describing, and correct me if I'm wrong, what you're describing is it sounds like it's basically a workaround. You know, you say develop your own systems kind of thing. That is essentially a workaround for a systemic corruption, right? Which it's a perfectly rational response to have a workaround where, okay, if survival is at stake, if I get left behind, you know, there's all kinds of, you know, deeper negative connotations to what that means. I don't think it's necessarily the case that you are then, you know, you're morally super culpable for doing what you need to do to survive in a system like that. So then my question is, change the norms or whatever. Essentially, the fundamental problem is the system is corrupt and the people understand it to be corrupt. Mm-hmm. Would you have to do as much of the, like, we have to reestablish the norms as much as the more deeper root cause of if people understood that the system is largely not corrupt? Mm-hmm. Like, if people understood, oh, okay, I don't have to do this workaround stuff anymore, do you think most of the people would drop that kind of having their own system if they understood that, like, we have a reasonably functioning system, if not perfect, because perfection is impossible?
Older people, yes. Younger people is the ones that I'd be like most concerned about.
Because they grew up with it.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
And so their lived experience is that they don't even think about the government as even reliable or not reliable. It's just like this thing that exists in parallel to reality almost, right? And so even
almost like a fish doesn't even know that it's in water.
Right. And so let me give you a good example of how Venezuela reconciled this in the past. So Venezuela's metro system was built and first launched in the 70s, and it was for many years the cleanest metro system in the entire world. The cleanest. In fact, every single year there was a book published about the rules and regulations and cultural norms that must be respected in the metro system.
That's
People
awesome.
in Venezuela prided themselves in the respect of having a clean and reliable transit system, and that meant that everybody needed to do their part in order to ensure that you step back and let people get off to then get on. Otherwise, trains don't leave on time, and you won't make it on time. You don't throw your trash. You don't eat on the metro. You don't do things on the metro that will annoy other people, like try to sell stuff, sing songs, whatever. Like
do drugs.
Do drugs.
And is this just in Caracas, or they have a broader?
No, it's just in Caracas. And so my mom, she talks about this, and she grew up with this, because I found one of these magazines somewhat recently. I've been collecting old Venezuelan literature. I should have brought some old books. But I have a friend who lives still in Venezuela, and he has like a deposit, a warehouse with, just huge amounts of books. And so
yeah, put this stuff on the Internet Archive, man.
Well, yeah, but some of this stuff never even made it there. And so it's interesting because you can find these kind of things and be like, it is weird to read this, or to see that I'd have to look up again the year, but this is in the 80s. Yeah, in the 80s, people in Caracas, the median family income was like $1,200 a month. In the 80s. You weren't making that in the United States. That's why there was a term to refer to Venezuelans in Miami, and they were known as the "that's good, give me two" crowd. Because they would buy so much because of their purchasing power. There's a James Bond movie where they pay, or some villain wants to get paid, and they ask him, do you want it in diamonds or bolívares? Venezuelan bolívares. Because at that time the bolívar was actually stronger than the dollar.
Wow.
So it's a very different reality that people lived at one time in Venezuela.
Yeah.
You mentioned Bolivar. I know nothing about Bolivar other than he's like the George Washington of South America. How much of does the Bolivar's life story, his politics, mythology, play into current Venezuelan governance? Because I know Chavez was like this. I'm only he was like he looked at.
Okay, this is the ideologue side of Chavez, and I actually like this quite a bit. I think that one of the things that I would have hoped to see come to fruition was that Chavez had a real interest in actually creating a common currency and came very close to doing it for Latin America. He wanted a euro system for Latin America, and he wanted a EU-type structure for Latin America, because in Chavez's view, which was the right one to have in my opinion, all these countries, which if you ask a Venezuelan and different people from Latin America, I think, and I say we, like in say American perspective, like think all those countries are very similar. They do not view themselves as similar, and they are not similar. And so they... Bye.
Later, Dan. Good to see you, buddy.
Bye-bye.
And so Chavez wanted to...
I'll see you again soon.
Yeah, hey, if you want to volunteer, look for speakers.
I'm with Karina on this.
Talk to me.
The horse is dead. Stop feeding the horse.
And so Chavez wanted to create an EU-type structure for Latin America.
pick a
with
new
a common
horse.
currency and basically open trade, open borders. And some of these things did come to fruition. That's why so many Venezuelans were able to
Chavez
go to
probably
many
could've
other
worked out
countries. He did a lot of the things that Chavez did well. Was he created open student visas across most of Latin America. Nobody else had done that before successfully. So it was easy for someone in Argentina to come study in Venezuela, and Venezuela go study in Argentina. Chavez did that.
Yeah,
There was many things he did in that
He would have
arena.
been all right.
Would a pan South Africa include Brazil, or would Brazil be separate because
You mean South America?
Yeah, would a pan? I apologize. Would a pan South America? Would that include Brazil, or would Brazil be separate because they speak Portuguese?
That'd be up to Brazil. I've been to Brazil. When I talk to Brazilians, they tend to not view themselves as like Latin American necessarily.
There's plenty of poverty there.
So they don't necessarily. I don't know. If they wanted to be part of that or not. I'm assuming probably would have gone that way, but.
How do you end up speaking English like a American? How?
So I'm pretty lucky that I came here as a kid. I only started speaking English about age 5, 4 or 5, and so my Spanish is fluent and my English is fluent in both.
Yeah.
But you speak English without any accent.
And I speak Spanish now.
Except for when you pronounce Spanish names like Maduro,
Yeah, well, it trips people out. in
Maduro.
both-
Caracas.
So
Caracas.
it trips people out in both languages who are like
Who taught you English?
CPS, Barney.
That's bullshit.
No, everything's horrible in Chicago.
When you went at
Everybody's
home,
murdered.
when you were in your own home, your mother and your father, you spoke Spanish.
Yes, yeah. They
And then when you went
they
to
learned
school-
English later on after we started school, basically.
How old are you now?
31.
But you're educated. I'm being patronizing. Whatever. Are Venezuelans educated?
Yeah, actually, some of the
Sorry.
most educated people. Again, another thing that was somewhat maintained, however, did kind of collapse. It takes way too long to get a degree in Venezuela, but a huge, and this is part of the problem that other Latin American countries see with the Venezuelan migration, like Chileans, broad stroke, but generally speaking, despise Venezuelans and despise their presence in the Chilean economy because Venezuelans are highly educated and were willing to work for lower wages.
So they're like the Jews of Chile.
I would say Chile's like the Japan of Latin America.
Really?
They have a very modest, quiet, reserved culture. My brother lived there for 7 years. He's a very open, extroverted person. He only ever was able to make one Chilean friend, and they were technically Argentine or raised in Chile.
See, they should take care of their own continent.
Yeah.
All those countries.
Let me,
America screws things up.
America's
And
part of the same
everybody-
continent, though.
Huh?
America's part of the same continent.
No, there's north and south.
It's all the same.
Question.
okay.
I have a question. This Nobel Peace Prize winner, what's it, Machado, is it?
Maria Corina.
What's she like? Is she gonna, if supposing that Trump installs her as dictator of Venezuela,
Mhm.
how will things go? I mean, are her intentions good?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, her intentions are good. Her intentions have been consistent since Chavez. She is one of the few people that has had the same message since the beginning. We've had, and I guess I could go to this talking point. If anyone remembers Juan Guaido,
Yeah.
What?
he was acknowledged as the interim president of Venezuela in 2019.
Oh yeah.
And then, now you ask Venezuelans and they'll kind of spit on his name. And so I can speak to that. But Maria Corina Machado definitely is consistent since the beginning. So here's my talking point. What was that? I'm sorry?
Who is she exactly?
So she is an opposition leader and has been part of the, so she's probably, I guess, center-right, You could consider her probably like, I don't know, I'm trying to, her political stuff would, if she were in the U.S., let's say, she would probably be something like a Dick Cheney, I guess.
She's in exile, right?
Ooh.
Spain?
No, Edmundo Gonzalez is.
Meaning she's like.
She's you
Can you
could say a
elaborate?
neoliberal, center-right conservative.
Free markets, maybe interventions in other.
The difference with conservatives in Latin America, though, is that if you were, again, let's go to some scenario, the social things that people here associate with conservatives are really a non-issue there. Meaning things like, I don't know, very
The left
libertarian.
doesn't like gays either.
Yeah, well, they don't, well, it depends. Like in Mexico, I guess you could say that's true, but in Venezuela, they're actually, I would say, more libertarian. They don't give a shit about what people do at all. You know what I mean? They care a lot about the markets and they care a lot about economic stability. There's not really, people in Venezuela don't vote because someone's gay or not gay or whatever. No one's voting for pro, women's rights or abortion. It really doesn't, it's not a talking point for politicians there. It wasn't before and isn't now.
How strong is the Catholic Church in Venezuela?
Yeah, that was another question I had.
So people are Catholic, but not really, I guess you could say.
So a woman might use birth control?
Oh yeah.
So Catholic, but not devout.
It depends. So there's some states that are very Catholic, and that have like Mérida, the state I lived in for a long time. It's known as La Ciudad de los Caballeros, so the city of gentlemen, and so it has this connotation for being like, you could say, I don't know, what is that city where all the Mormons live or something?
Salt Lake City.
Yeah. So it's kind of like, I don't know.
Catholic Salt Lake City.
Correct, the Catholic Salt Lake City.
It's
Very
the
much like
Rome
that.
of Venezuela.
Places will close at 8 p.m. and everything's closed on Sunday and everyone goes to church and
So
everything's
it's like the South.
everything's very
in the United
civil.
States. Bible
How many
Belt.
children do you have, though? I mean, do
Me?
you, well, do people have families of 8 kids or people have families of 2 kids?
I don't know what the average is. Yeah, I wouldn't know what the average is.
Since
What
it's
about
out, how many
abortion?
kids you have? 2?
I have 2, yeah.
Yeah.
And
it's
are
in
you
your
planning
photo,
on having
right?
8 more?
No.
I was wondering if I could.
No, what do you mean?
It's a good
I have
Catholic.
2
And
hands,
back
2
in the day, a
feet.
good Catholic would
I was
have.
wondering if I could bring it back to the American perspective / agenda, and you brought up that defense, the strategic defense document and everything. I wasn't as aware of we had indictments or something going on since the Obama, I guess we can call it the Obama era now. And so Venezuela's been on the radar to greater and lesser degrees in the United States for some time.
Yeah.
That's one of the things you were saying.
Can I add one point that
Sure.
I think is important? The senior advisor to the Biden administration on Venezuela, by the way, Juan Gonzalez, he stepped down at one point, kind of surprisingly so. And it's recently come out that the reason for this is that he had a conflict of interest that he never disclosed, which was that he was still working for a firm, I think it was some sort of private equity firm of some kind, that through some way or another benefited from the Maduro regime staying in power. And so, there's an article that I'll send out, it's in Spanish, but it doesn't matter. It links to where the policies that he wrote and whatnot, and the kind of conjecture that he used, and he was the person that the administration turned to when Biden administration asked, should we only do sanctions or do some sort of more direct pressure type stuff, because we have 8 million people in our hemisphere that are leaving this country, right? Like millions of people are leaving, this is a problem, what should we do? And he kind of said, no, just, economic sanctions, continue to have diplomatic relationship with them, blah, blah, blah.
So coincidentally, the thing least likely to disrupt a Maduro,
Correct,
Okay.
because that regime staying in power benefited him financially.
At least that's the strong suspicion, which is exactly why you need to avoid even the appearance of a conflict of interest.
So
I think what we're saying is that it did benefit him financially.
He did,
and
yes.
the question is, did that influence his
correct. Yeah.
advice?
He directly had financial interest tied to Venezuelan debt collectors.
So the question I was gonna ask is, so in recent months.
And I'm sorry, this was
Sure.
reported by the Human Rights Foundation, and is now because he's no longer part of the administration, there's not really anything to do. But they're kind of like, hey, you should have reported this. slap your hand, and it's just like,
Biden hit a lot
you were
of
corrupt,
incompetence.
you know, and you just, there's nothing, there's no recourse.
So what I was going to ask is, so it's in recent months that, you know, Venezuela has sort of gotten on my radar as, oh, this seems to be a more prominent front and center issue for America or whatever, for whatever reasons, right? I haven't done a deep dive. I just have listened to a few podcasts here and there. I know for someone like libertarian Dave Smith is very much like, you know, we shouldn't, you know, it smacks too much of like neocon adventurism and nation building, and you know, we've had enough of that where people have a very understandable, people have a very understandable, like, at this point, reflexive distaste for this kind of adventurism. I'm actually veering to a different question than what I was originally getting at, so I'll just ask the different question now. And earlier you kind of were talking about regime change, and it would be good if there was regime change, and you're hoping that like that the United States can kind of intervene on that front. What is your best case for it will be different this time?
My best case for it will be different.
Like, it won't turn into just another, like, ridiculous boondoggle where we're going to lose a crap ton of money, we're going to lose, you know, soldiers, which is the most important thing. We're already stretched thin financially, all this kind of stuff. Like, what's different about this situation that is not different about Afghanistan, Iraq, and all this other kind of stuff?
Yeah, this one's easy. The people, like the people in Venezuela don't want this government in power whatsoever. There is nobody that is going to stick around if they're not in power. Meaning, there's not some, you know, huge apparatus that will suddenly rise up of people who are like, we got to defend our sovereignty. The vast majority of Venezuelans want and voted for this government to leave, and it's a, you know, we're in this dire situation of life and death for many people there, that it's kind of like, yeah, if someone's going to get us out of the situation, that is very good. You know, there's not going to be this a bunch of people that stick around trying to fight for power, or these different militia groups, or there's no extremist religious groups in Venezuela, or these, you know, people that are just so asymmetrically misaligned with us culturally, right? Like, you know, like you see in Afghanistan and Iraq. I just,
has all
think it's very different.
money and all the War departments, so.
Correct, which is why I think that they should get rid of their military altogether and be more like, you know, Costa Rica or even Puerto Rico. I think that would be the best case scenario for Venezuela at this point.
In a moment, the chair will recognize Michael, but I just wanted to follow up. So just to summarize, you use the term like asymmetrical, like values kind of thing, lack of like religious extremists. You could also throw in, like, there's precedent for democracy, so this wouldn't be like, you know, we're going to impose democracy on places that are totally, you know, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of things fundamentally that are different that you think, like,
we're not a rural country either, right? You look at most of what Vietnam was, these were rural communities that were agrarian and lived in isolation. Most of the population lives in a major city.
So what, one way to say it, and then I'll turn it over to Mike, one way to say it is, they were wrong when they said that the Iraqis would welcome us as liberators, but they will be correct when they say that Venezuelans will welcome us as liberators if we get rid of this Maduro regime.
I think a lot of Catholic Marines will come back with Catholic Venezuelan wives if that occurs.
All right.
Catholic Marines would do what?
Get Catholic Venezuelan wives.
I actually think that's actually a pro to Venezuela, is that if I were a Marine or part of the United States Armed Forces, I'd be pretty motivated to go to Venezuela. It is a beautiful country, and I'd be pretty motivated about liberating it. I think if you're being sent to Iraq and Afghanistan,
the sales pitch is getting a bit too good to be true.
I'm less motivated to go be in the desert, you know.
Gotcha.
But underneath all those, like, you know, garments, don't the Afghani women seem pretty hot?
Yeah, but you're out in the desert.
Yeah.
Venezuela used to be a big country for beauty pageant.
It is, yeah.
It's no longer, right?
Well, I know, it still is.
Yeah.
right?
Still is.
Times.
I stopped watching it because, you know.
All right, I'm on board. Anyway, Michael.
What's the relationship
Oh, she's
between Venezuela and Cuba?
That's why I had to fix this.
That is a complicated one. Obviously, the Cuban state benefits from Venezuela because it is a validation.
Hey,
Guys,
The Cuban state relies on Venezuela as validation for it to continue to exist as well. So, you know, the Cubans, I think, have a vested interest, but not a lot of cards to play in terms of maintaining the regime. I think there was a tighter relationship between, Castro and Chavez than maybe there is now. I think more of Maduro's relationships are with actually Iranians and Russians more than anything else.
So I have a question about Russia, Iran, and China, and you kind of mentioned them all as a threat. I'm just wondering what you think about those countries' involvement in Venezuela or other South American countries, and how that's any different than the U.S.'s involvement in Southeast Asia and Western Europe.
Yeah, I mean, it's really no different. It's just we are in the United States and not Iranian or Chinese. I'm sure if we were in China, we would be saying how ensuring that we keep the Maduro regime in power promotes China's influence in that region, and that soft power is going to, continue to compound and grow the, eventual trying to replace the dollar, the petrodollar. So I think ultimately it is no different.
I mean, because it's just thinking what people say on each side. You could say exactly the same thing. Like you hear the neocons say, "Oh my God, this is terrible. What a threat." But the United States needs to be the biggest and the best.
Right.
And I'm thinking, if the other side said that, we'd be freaking out.
Right.
Yeah. And
Again, I never took a side.
Us, in the United States saying that the United States has to be the biggest and the best and whatever. I'm not using exact words, but well, I would say that they have a right to be upset with the United States here.
Absolutely.
That's
my opinion on when I think about the Russia-Ukraine situation, right? And the situation that led to the Ukrainian, the war in Ukraine right now. I think this is a perfect example of Russia's going to respond in that way, and they have a right to have the opinion that they should be able to restore what they consider the Soviet Union or whatever they want to call it, right? They have the right to believe that and want to do that, right? That's just the reality of the world, right? And so I think, I don't take a side other than what for me is logical, which is what is better for me individually, right? At an individual level. And if I try to go for what's most morally correct, I don't think that works in our world. Unfortunately, it's just not how the world works. I think it works locally, just not at the scale of the world.
I just wonder what would be the outcome of greater influence from those countries.
I think it would lead, from the U.S. perspective, from the
Venezuelans' perspective,
it keeps that regime in power, and it keeps people
it's all about keeping him in power.
Mm-hmm.
How is it in power? Oh, sorry, could I?
I'm going to recognize myself, and then I'll recognize you.
Okay.
You know what? I'll recognize you first.
Go ahead. This is a real quick question. It's a follow-up. When vast majority of people are starving, in agony, in hardship, and that's where the soldiers come from. Don't they have family who are suffering? And when it gets to what's it called, a point, like breaking point, right?
Yeah.
You can have even more than 50% of people are suffering, and soldier will still obey.
Yes.
But when it gets to a breaking point, I'd say 85%. It sounds like that's how it is. how come they still have the control of the armed forces, the loyalty?
In the 2024 post-election protest, of the, I think about 1,200 people that were arrested during that immediate protest right after the elections in 2024, something like 30 or 40% of the people arrested were National Guard, police officers, and military officers.
Oh,
Okay.
And they were tortured and killed,
I see.
or are being tortured and killed. So it becomes obey or die.
Yeah. Yeah, when people are suffering, they lose their job, but the soldiers still have the jobs.
Correct.
They are able to a certain degree to support their own
Correct.
family, so the family will be among the less suffer.
This is why now
Family,
the
right?
biggest threat of danger in Venezuela is the political violence and the violence by the state, and not actual like crime. Because, you know, even if you're in the military, you know, you don't toe the line, you are going to be under threat. And you know, my mom does interpreting, and so she does a lot of interpretation for asylum cases, and here in Chicago. And many of these Venezuelans that come as refugees or on TPS, you know, that she's interpreted for, many of them are police officers, National Guard members, military, who said something that seemed like dissent, and then were basically either tortured or had a family member kidnapped, and then left, you know, and came to the United States. So, you know, there's a culture within there of repressing and creating fear to keep order and keep power. Most of Maduro's top cadre of like his personal security are Cubans, not Venezuelans.
I see.
They're Cuban and some now Russian.
Okay.
His security team is not Venezuelan. So I think that tells you a lot. Of course
He can't
not.
trust his own
Of course
people.
not.
Why don't we give military aid to
I think that says a
other
lot.
countries?
When he
Yeah,
gets
that says a
treated
lot.
medically, he goes to Cuba, not in Caracas.
Yeah, that speaks volumes.
All right, Ernie.
yeah. You seem, Eduardo, to favor the notion of outside intervention or help, probably from the United States, and I might tend to agree with you. One of the few things I think that maybe Trump is on the right track, but, well, not many, but that one maybe. But my question is this, if the U.S. were to intervene under Trump's direction of leadership, do you think Trump really cares about Venezuela, or does he just need a war because his polls are going down?
There you go.
Again,
A
wag the dog, wag the dog, and here's the end.
I mean, I don't think he cares about Venezuela. No, I don't. Actually, no, I don't think he cares. I do think, you know, his country club, right? It's a country club, golf club.
Yeah.
Mar-a-Lago?
Mar-a-Lago, or whatever it is, sits in Doral, which is the largest Venezuelan community in the United States.
Wow.
I find it hard to believe that there has not been for years wealthy Venezuelans in his ear saying, when you get into power, we need you to do this, we need you to do this, we need you to do this. Venezuelan people, you know, outside of Venezuela, you know, they achieve very high qualities of life and have, again, because they tend to be college educated and very entrepreneurial, they, you know, are generally speaking very high earners. Like in the example of Spain, which has a lot of people from Venezuela that move there, I think they're the wealthiest group, like immigrant group in the country. I think their median income is higher than any other group by a large percentage amount. And so with that, I mean, you know, Trump probably has a lot of people in his circle and that he knows that want this to happen in Venezuela, both from a business perspective, because it'd be good for them as business people. Many of these Venezuelans that are wealthy in Miami had industries in Venezuela, and they want to obviously go back into that. And they're probably saying to him, hey, you fire this up, and we're able to kick this back up again, and all is going to be great, and we're going to be able to do, you know, a lot of business together and, you know, whatnot. So, no, I don't think Trump cares about the humanitarian aspect of it. I do think it's both a geopolitical win with the change and a domestic win, because you suddenly don't have a mass exodus of people that you then need to deport. And you don't have the TPS problem, and you don't have the refugee crisis at all. It ceases to exist. Because unlike other refugee crises, the Venezuelans don't want to be outside of Venezuela. They want to be in Venezuela. I myself, if this regime changes and it is no longer politically a problem, let's say from state violence, even if my quality of life is lower there, I would be happy to be part of the reconciliation there, because I think that is critical to the stabilizing of the state, is people who are willing to sacrifice individually in order to push the country forward in towards reconciliation, which is actually a much bigger problem to solve for, right? Those cultural norms and the rebuilding of a sense of stability.
He just has to die.
Justin, and then Mike, do you have anything after I get Justin?
Nah.
Okay, cool. Justin?
I'm at the age where I have to pull my glasses off to read stuff closer. Okay, so my Ludwig von Mises, who's a liberal philosopher, said this. The metaphysical theory of the state declares, approaching in this respect the vanity presumption of the absolute monarchs, that each individual state is sovereign, that it represents the last and highest court of appeals. But for the liberal, the world does not end at the borders of the state. In his eyes, whatever significance national borders have is only incidental and subordinate. His political thinking encompasses the whole of mankind. The starting point for his entire philosophy is the conviction that the division of labor is international and not merely national. He realizes that the very first that it is not sufficient to establish peace within each country, that it is more important that all nations live at peace with one another. The liberal therefore demands that the political organization of society be extended until it reaches the culmination in a world state that unites all nations on an equal basis. I think the United States Constitution is the best currently expression of a order where you can have, sort of like a liberal order that, states are sort of sovereign, but like we're all equal, and is it possible, maybe not now in Venezuela, but is it possible that in South America or even Central America that there could be movements to convince the people there to join the United States via adding, like Article 5, Mexico become part of the United States? Can Venezuela become part of the United States? Can Chile, Argentina, blah, blah, blah? Is there a movement? Can there be a movement? Is this desirable? Should other countries want to be part of the United States? So you can have, you have the protection of the United States military. You have courts that will enforce, classical liberal norms, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, blah, blah, blah. Is there a desire for this in South and Central America?
Is it even a topic that comes up?
I don't think so, no. I mean, sure, it comes up, and the reason I don't think it's popular is because I think it's actually most likely a lose-lose. In particular because that really degrades and lowers wages for everybody, because you increase the pool of available labor and educated people. You saw this with Chile. People leaving Venezuela are in desperate situations, right? So they went to Chile and they're educated, and they were, taking jobs from Chileans. That's a reality. Now, does that make a Venezuelan a morally wrong person? No. Does it create a bad situation for Chilean citizens who are born in that country? Yes, it creates a problem for them. They are no longer getting that job because it's cheaper to hire the Venezuelan. And so if you create sort of those states, right, in these countries where labor will be cheaper and lower, that's not good for U.S. wages. That's not good for overall purchasing power, right? And so I think it's a lose-lose for that reason. I don't know how you arrive to that scenario without there being this perspective that, well, you can't suddenly flood our market with all of this, you know, discounted labor and not expect people here to have a problem with it, right? We already have enough of a problem with it from a U.S. perspective with outsourcing.
I think one, you know, tell me if you disagree. I think, or you know, even you, Justin, you know, tell me if you disagree. But I think you could argue within the scale of, what was it, Chile? You were okay. Within the scale of Chile, you know,
Very chilly. Chilly inside.
I'm going to call it Chile if, you know, the various Latin American countries can call us Estados Unidos. You know, we're the United States, we're not the Estados Unidos. I'm going to call you Chile. No, anyway. But within the context of Chile, you can have the standard libertarian argument, well, you know, that's just the free market, you know, blah, 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 blah. But but that ignores that at the larger meta scale between countries, the only reason why you have that flood into Chile is because of the severe market distortions that are happening in Venezuela. Mm-hmm. That if you didn't have those market distortions happening in Venezuela, you wouldn't have the supposed free market, you know, Chile divorced of the broader context. Would you agree that argument fails because it fails to take into account the severe market distortion that caused that influx in the first place? Would
Yeah.
you? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I was gonna, yeah, go ahead.
You asked him if that conversation happens. You said it does, but you didn't elaborate on it.
I mean, it comes up in that people don't want, they like their sovereignty, even from each other, meaning, you know, Venezuela, Colombia, Panama used to be Nueva Granada. They used to just be one Gran Colombia, that's what it's called. It used to be one country. And so, you know, even still, you know, people don't really see it that way and never really saw it that way. People like their sovereignty in these countries and their, you know, national identity. There's a strong sense of national pride in general in Latin America.
Does Maduro have any health problems?
I don't know.
David.
Yeah, I think there's a certain amount of talking at cross purposes here because Justin seemed to be assuming that the reason we don't have a Venezuelan type dictatorship in the United States is because of the US Constitution.
No, also...
Whereas what Eduardo was saying was that given enough stresses of a particular sort, the US could go the way of Venezuela. So, if that's true, and I suspect that it is, that raises the question, is it possible to devise a constitution which would make it much, much less likely that that kind of transition to a dictatorship could occur? Is there something we could do in terms of a constitution that would actually be... Now, of course, ultimately, the answer must be no, because the constitution depends upon people interpreting the constitution, and they can always interpret it any way they want. But so that's why I put it as a matter of degree. Is there some kind of constitution, some kind of constitutional change, which would make a country much more impervious to that kind of loss of democracy?
Are you talking about in general, adding any amendment to any country's constitution?
Yeah, I'm starting afresh with a new constitution.
I think you'd need a sort of a decentralized system to run the books, and some sort of most likely unbiased, some kind of AI in order to really govern and maintain that. Meaning, okay, let's use the Venezuela
That sounds
example.
like a conflict of interest, Mr. AI.
Yeah, well, but let me give the example.
We can trust the AI to look out for us, you mean?
Well, we can trust the AI to not care about us or care about us.
Thank you.
To just be.
Thanks.
And
These
so
things are fabulous.
with Venezuela, with the money, for example, that's been stolen, right?
And that's
if
pretzel?
all of that were hosted on some decentralized platform where every transaction was completely visible by every citizen and every dollar, you know, every spend could be traced and seen into some tangible good, you evade the mismanagement aspect of things, right? When things are not transparent, when people can rewrite the books and change what they look like or what they say and just go on TV and say, here's where the money we, because that's what they used to do. Here's all the money. Chavez would go on TV every night and say, here's the $75 million that we just invested into blah. And I've got the minister of blah right here, and he's going to lead this effort, and here's the check, Mr. Minister, and go forth and make Venezuela great again. And it was this whole big show he would always do every night. But if that was a transaction that you could actually see in somewhere, you can't have that corruption. And I think similarly, assets being on some sort of decentralized platform would prevent corruption, which then prevents, collapse of of a state. Let's say.
Well, my first reaction to that suggestion is that if you had every transaction transparent, well, first of all, I think there are very good reasons for why some transactions shouldn't be transparent.
Right.
Why you shouldn't know about my transactions, put it that way.
Right.
But apart from that, I think, given the fact that not all the population consists of virtuoso economists, it's going to lead to demands for intervention to prevent certain transactions happening, because people are going to suppose in their ignorance that these transactions, which we know, because the free market is always perfect, we know would be optimal, is that people are going to think that they're suboptimal in some way.
Right, yes.
Later, Mike.
Yeah. This happens to me often. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. The question I was gonna ask before I veered off into, how will it be different this time is, I remember a number of weeks ago, maybe a couple months ago or whatever, that Maduro, there were reports that there was tough negotiations or something like that between Trump and Maduro, and Maduro was going to give Trump anything he wanted. Basically, you can have all the oil proceeds, you can have all this. And I'm curious if you could, and I got a little more to add to that, but I'm curious if you can shed some light on that. The thought that occurred to my mind immediately is, no legitimate leader would concede that much unless the stuff they had wasn't really theirs to begin with. You know what I mean? You're not, if you're a criminal and it's a narco state and all this kind of stuff, you're a criminal, everybody wants you gone or whatever, giving away, there's an expression, giving away the farm or something like that. Giving away everything suggests to me he knows he's totally illegitimate and he's just willing to do whatever to just stay where he is. Mm-hmm. And it's not because no self-respecting leader would be willing to give everything away,
right? Unless
he wasn't literally a self-respecting leader,
right?
So I was curious if you had any, but more to the point, what were those negotiations, and was that headed anywhere but likely regime change, or was that what's going on with all that?
So a lot of that was, my understanding of it was, Maduro was fine with hosting elections, which they already did, and they lost.
Right.
After they stole them, right? So it was they tried to do the same card they did before, because the last election in 2024, the reason we all believed that there would be actual change, potential change, is because for one of the first times in many years, they allowed other countries to actually view the elections. The whole thing, the whole downfall of Maduro started with the 2024 elections. They strategically allowed other countries to come and watch the results of the election in real time. Okay, human rights groups, United States was there, other countries, right, credible countries that could say this was a real, fair election. And the problem was, in parallel to that, Maria Corina Machado was going to be the candidate from the opposition that was going to be on the ballot. 2 months before voting day.
She was knocked off the ballot, wasn't she?
They said she is not allowed to run. Somebody else on her
I thought
team,
that happened prior to 2024.
Her being knocked off the ballot.
Yeah, I thought that was like maybe a previous cycle years ago. No, it was more recent than that?
It was the 2024 election cycle, and it was very
Okay.
close to the actual election day. She says, okay, well, my, running mate is going to be this professor, and then they say, no, she can't run either because she didn't register, blah, 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 some stuff.
So they did some pre-rigging, you could say.
Correct, some pre-rigging, because the election was going to be fair. And this is where they screwed up. They thought, perfect, everyone's going to watch us truly democratically win this election, because nobody is going to vote for some opposition candidate that they don't know. Okay? And most people aren't going to even go out to vote, because when you go out to vote in Venezuela in 2024, your name goes on a list if you vote for the opposition.
So it's not a secret ballot.
It's not a secret ballot. Those boxes are reviewed. And a Venezuelan that I know here in Chicago, he's on TPS.
What is TPS again?
Temporary protected status.
Got it, okay.
In 2024, he in his state, in his municipality, because it's same as here. You get people from Republican and Democratic who watch the ballots, right? Like they're there to observe, right? Same thing there in Venezuela. He was part of the opposition party's observers, and some person from the state put his name on a list and told him, you're being watched and all this stuff, and he was followed home that night and all this kind of stuff, simply because he had told somebody there who wanted to follow people into the actual voting box that you can't do that. You're not allowed to do that. They need to go by themselves. And he did what was right, which is to say, get this person out of here, right? And he was threatened. When he came to the United States, he said, they're going to fucking kill me. Anyways, all this to say, Maria Corina Machado, puts Edmundo Gonzalez in at last minute. The state didn't have any recourse because he was not a nobody, but he kind of was just a nobody. But he was eligible to be on the ballot. And she ran this blitz campaign, basically as her, but saying, him as me, kind of thing, you know what I mean?
Wink, wink.
Wink, wink. And they end up getting, some 87% of the vote in this kind of really grassroots, beautiful, really beautiful moment of democracy where everyone's watching, and the state just refused to hand over power. That's why every single
They
country
refused to do what?
to hand over power.
And the
So
Chicago.
did they give some reason at that point?
Yeah, they said no. Literally.
No, but I mean,
And the reaction to the international observers.
They said that the
were
regime-
all the international observers unanimous in saying that it was a faked
Yeah.
election
Yeah.
result?
everybody said it was fake and that they should step down from power and do the democratic transition, or release evidence that they won the election.
Similar situation in the United States, where they haven't released any.
Yeah, the whole thing was they won't release the final ballot counts. Okay? Every municipality reports ballot counts. Now, while this was going on, everybody was keeping track. But the final ballot count, because of all this, so basically they lose the election, everybody knows it, and then 2 days after the election, the few institutions that were not still part of the government or something suddenly suddenly become part of the government. Some made up nonsense about actually that institution no longer is in control of the ballots. Now Congress determines if the ballots after an election are released or not, and we're deciding not to release them. And the state won anyways, so there's nothing to be said.
Nothing to see here.
Nothing to see here. It's
Is
just
that justification for intervention? All these observers witnessed a sort of illegitimate election.
No, I mean, not. If it wasn't a exodus of 9 million people and counting, and mass torture, humanitarian crisis, regional risk and threat from foreign powers such as China, Russia, and Iran, I don't think the U.S. would give two shits. If the shitstorm's contained within a country, do you really care? I think the perfect example, what is it? Eddie Izzard talks about, Pol Pot, right, killing all these people, and You know, nobody cared. You know, Hitler,
Well done.
he's like, as long as you kill your own people, no one's gonna bother you.
So it's basically like, yeah, I guess you're right. The international observers can't do anything.
So they knocked this Machado off the ballot.
Mm-hmm.
They almost succeeded in knocking somebody off the ballot in this country, and I think those parallels are interesting as well.
The Alex Jones community suspects that the Venezuelan state is somehow involved or something to do with the voting machines in this country. I don't know.
I've heard that connection. It sounds a bit far-fetched, but I wouldn't
There are things Alex Jones has said,
reject
though, that
anything
things-
out of hand if
Yeah.
it shows the government to be wicked.
You know, so I don't know. But that, you know, yeah, there's a bunch of weird stuff there too. That the reason that you see, with the exception of Mamdani, who again I think is very similar to Trump as well, why the Democrats seem to be soft on Venezuela or something like this. It's kind of interesting. But I like that, you know, Mamdani said that there is no doubt that Maduro's regime is one of like repression and, you know, a dictatorship, right?
I had a question about support for Israel. Has Maduro stated support for like the Palestinian? He has? Okay.
Yeah.
And my understanding is Machado has expressed support for Israel, correct?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
And that's why everybody. That's why they're against Maduro, is because he's pro-Palestine.
Right.
That's the only reason.
Do you think there is any like support for Israel or support for Palestinian pressure in any of this like regime change stuff that's stirring up in the United States?
I think it has probably more to do with the Iranian influence and connections between the Venezuelan state, you know, versus like Palestinian, Israeli related items.
Do you have that one more time? Maduro or Machado support Israel?
Machado supports Israel. Like, gun to her head, she would say she's pro-Israel. However, you know, again, the context is very important. Is she going, when her country's future and everything hinges on having, you know, a good relationship with the United States, which means also having a good relationship with Israel, is she going to say, no, you know what, actually, I'm kind of more pro-Palestine, you know, and make it harder for those allies to come to her side? You know, so I think that that's the reality of, like, some of these things, right?
Right. No, I can understand that. And that guy in Argentina who comes out with statements in support of Israel is probably partly because he knows that if he goes the other way, the US won't back him.
Right.
Almost all governments and elites support Israel, whereas the people in most countries support the Palestinians.
No, most governments support the Palestinians.
Most governments?
Of course, yes.
That's not
90%,
what I mean. That's not
yeah.
what I'm
The
hearing.
entire world supports the Palestinians.
Oh yeah, the
except for
people.
Europe and the US and a few places like Argentina.
Okay, well, okay.
Israel has
There are
no
200
support
countries. I don't have a
internationally,
handle on
virtually
all
no
of
support internationally.
Yeah. Well, I know the Palestinians have more support certainly from the, shall we say, the proletariat, the people.
Oh, I think that's quite wrong. I think the elites in the global south solidly support Palestine.
Okay, that's interesting.
As well as the populations. Now, there are countries where the population is militantly pro-Palestine and the government is not, like Turkey and
France,
Egypt.
Germany.
You know, most Middle Eastern countries, in fact.
Jordan, yeah.
Jordan. But apart from that,
They face terrorism on behalf of Palestinians.
the opposition to Israeli genocide is global. It's very, very few areas. It's just Europe and the US and Argentina, and that's about it.
So what you're saying is Javier Milei is awesome.
I'm saying I understand why he comes out with these pro-Israel statements, because he knows that if he doesn't, he'll be toast. But if as long as he does that, the US will back him in all his policies, which many people regard as too excessively libertarian.
Is there such a thing?
So the
Not in
Venezuelan
my
community
view.
in the United States is mostly in Miami, or in terms of Chicago, do you have any substantial amount in Chicago?
Now we do.
Okay.
Yeah,
Is there
I
a
think about
particular
50,
neighborhood where
50,000 or something.
is there a particular neighborhood that tends to?
I'm not sure. You know, I think.
A good Venezuelan restaurant.
Oh, Bricarepa.
Recommended what?
Bricarepa.
Uh-huh.
There's one in Lincoln Park, and then there's one in Hermosa.
Are they any good?
What's it called
You
again?
know,
Brica.
Brica?
Arepa. So Brica and then Arepa.
If you
Got
decide,
it.
if you decide to send your notes for David to distribute or whatever, make sure to include those restaurant recommendations.
but you don't have a Venezuelan enclave in Chicago.
This is where we're secretly being
Now there
being
is now,
funded.
for sure. Like when I was,
This is the interest group that is actually.
11 years ago, there really wasn't. Now there
Okay.
is. Yeah. Now,
Now
I think
after
it's
the
like 50 or 60.
diaspora, you now do.
I
Okay.
think, yeah. I mean, there might have been like 5,000 or something. Now it's like 50 or 60,000 or something like this.
Yeah, Justin.
So you have all these Venezuelan, people arriving in Chicago. Many of them hung out on the streets. You still will see Venezuelan expats selling candy on CTA. I personally have bought pizza and food for Venezuelans. Went to the police station, saw they're all sleeping on the floor. The people, those people, are they mostly anti-Maduro? Are they mostly Christian families who are just escaping tyranny? Are they opportunists looking to take advantage of the United States?
The vast majority. So there's multiple waves of the diaspora and of migration out of Venezuela. So let's say the most recent one, right? So the huge amounts that came, let's say during the pandemic, the whole Biden administration, let's say, right? A lot of that wave of migration was the very poor people of Venezuela. Prior to that, your waves of migration really start in the early 2000s with the very wealthy, right? Then you have the wealthy, and then you have the upper middle class, and then you have the middle class, and then finally you get to your very impoverished people who are the ones that walked here.
And went through the Darien
Walked
Gap?
here, yeah, who were trafficked here in many cases, right? You have people that are arriving, in kind of broken links of families and things like this. This is a very complicated topic, especially for Venezuelans, because a lot of those people, primarily due to lack of education, many of them most likely voted for the government in past elections, meaning in 2014 and maybe even in 2024. So there is a lot of animosity towards some of those people from the existing Venezuelan community here, because they view them as the reason, and they view them as, go back to Venezuela for what you voted for. And so, again, not all of them, and certainly not even the majority, but enough of a minority that the ones who you do see who are, let's say, committing crimes or just simply doing things that would be considered, like, for example, selling candy in the street or things like this, that's how they survived in Venezuela as well. They don't know any other life, right? They don't know that I have conversations with a lot of these people and I try to help them. Like, they don't even understand that when they're here on TPS, that they can go get a job making $12 or $13 an hour. They don't understand those things. They don't know. Nobody tells them, right? And I say, like, why are you doing this? This doesn't make any sense. Just go get a job. And like, what, I can do that? Like, they don't understand. They're undereducated, under-resourced people who are in survival mode.
But
And that survival mode
I've
breeds certain,
I've encountered many people, waitresses and so forth, that were a few years ago, they were lawyers when they were in Venezuela.
Yes.
That's kind of the opposite of what you're saying.
Correct. Yeah, and those
Well,
are
he's
those,
just talking about the newest waves.
yeah, the latest
Oh, the
wave.
latest wave, okay,
And not the
okay.
majority again, but enough of what you see visually, right? The majority of Venezuelans are not on the CTA selling candy. You only see one
Certainly,
or two,
yeah.
right? But you don't see, if you look out, you don't see the many others that exist out there, right? If you didn't know me, you walk past me, you're not thinking, oh, there's a Venezuelan who, came here. I was a high school dropout. I ended up getting my bachelor's, my master's, and all this kind of stuff, right? And so, but you wouldn't necessarily know that context of that story, right? And so there's enough, though, of a minority that is coming here and still living out those behaviors that we ask ourselves, okay, what are these people doing here? They're just kind of like living on the street or setting up little stalls to sell candy and things like this.
Well, let's even say like the worst example. Given you already say they're a minority, like shouldn't say the nativist party in the United States, who cares about Christianity and like family values. My experience with the Venezuelans on the street is they're family oriented. They escaped maybe they voted for some of it, maybe they are ignorant, whatever. But I don't think that they're out to not be Americans. So wouldn't the nativist party that's in power federally want pro-family, pro-Christian people to be part of their voting bloc?
This is one of the confusing contradictions to me about the current administration's policies. I don't understand why they haven't made a direct public correlation between we're clearly trying to effect regime change in Venezuela. We know that there is large support from the Latin American community in the United States right now for the Republican Party, let's say, because of the Latin Americans traditionally being more not only center-right, but also just conservative in nature. Why is there such an anti-communism? Why is there such animosity in the discourse and an inclusion of Venezuela on the list of countries, these 19 countries and all this stuff right now, with the murder of the National Guard troop in D.C. and all of this? Why is Venezuela in that list instead of saying, Venezuelans, we're going to give you your TPS and we're going to get you your country back so you can all go back? No Venezuelan's going to say, don't send us back. They want to go back. They want to go back. None of them want to be here. So actually they don't want to be American. They're happy to be here. They're grateful to be here, but they don't want to be here. And it's not because they don't like this country. It's just that they prefer their country. And that's kind of a rare thing, for
rare.
migrants.
That is rare.
Yes. So you're convinced that the vast majority would go back if they
Oh,
could?
absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Myself included.
Yeah. Okay.
That's how Trump should sell it.
That's what I'm so confused about.
Yep.
But even that's not how they're doing it, and
No.
and even just like them coming here seems to trigger a anti-Venezuelan.
Correct. It's a
Okay,
big
here's some
contradiction.
bigotry.
And I don't understand it. I don't understand why.
Part of me, and I'm a bigot, but part of it is,
I think we
I
all
see
know
the-
that you're a bigot.
well, they're selling candy
In
on the
case you
street, they're
forget.
very, very poor, and it's always, I'm pregnant with a baby and a toddler. Forgive me for saying that, but it's a perception. I'm barefoot, I'm pregnant, I'm really, really poor, and I just have unlimited number of children.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think it's part of that wave that is undereducated, under-resourced, and that's enough of a minority that you see it, right? But, there's not, of the 50 or 60,000 Venezuelans that live in Chicago. I'll give you the example. The restaurant I recommended, Bricarepa, that owner, I don't know her situation now. I should probably check in with her. She came to the country in 2017, on temporary protected status, okay? She owns 3 restaurants and employs over 100 people. She's under threat of deportation now with losing TPS, right? And so you have all those people and all the very likely Venezuelans that she employs in this city, and the 3 businesses she runs, you know, I guess what I mean by this is, for every one of those cases, right, you've got many others who are just living life and contributing to society here. But there's, again, enough of a minority of Venezuelans that have come in this wave that I guess if they were here barefoot with their toddler and all this stuff, that's the exact same thing they were doing in Venezuela too. And they probably were always looking for a handout in Venezuela.
Part of the anti-immigration sentiment that does exist is partly about birth rates, and part of it is the difference between having a population that is growing exponentially and having a population that's, I'm 40 years old, but I'm not sure if I'm ready to have kids yet, because I'm not sure if I can afford it type situation. You know,
Those people that came in, cross the border, they need to pay human trafficker, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that means they weren't dirt poor when we were there. At least they had the means to pay for that expense. So the really dirt poor people, they were left behind. They were stuck in their home country, and yeah, that's a hypothesis. Just tell me I'm wrong.
That is the case for some of the waves of migration where you have people paying, you know. There's a very good YouTube channel that covers this. Channel 5 News. Andrew, I can't remember his name, but he did a series on people leaving Venezuela, going through the Darien Gap, and crossing the border.
Add that to your notes.
Yeah, I'll have to add this to my notes. His coverage, Andrew Callahan, that's his name. Amazing, amazing journalist. The people who will pay the money, he actually says mostly of them are like, and you know, he'll kind of showcase this, are like, many are Chinese nationals who pay like $2,000 or something, you know, and they get, you know, VIP treatment on this journey, whatever you consider that to be. Unfortunately, the other way that you pay traffickers is 2 ways. One, the reality of, you know, with women, there's the sexual exploitation aspect of it. And 2, there is the criminal gang that does most of this, Tren de Aragua, the smuggling of people, simply will extort you and say, you're going to get to the United States, and you're going to get a job, and you're going to pay me money until you've paid off the money that you owe me for me getting you to the United States. And so, you know, you kind of owe them that money, and until that's paid off, you know, they basically garnish your wages, and if you don't pay them, they're going to come and kill you, you know, or kill your family that's still in Venezuela, you know, things like this.
That's
So
a very costly operation. You have to have network on the destination country as well as the original country. Wow, that's bigger than just the travel part.
Correct, yeah. This is again, Tren de Aragua could be its own entire topic. Was started in a prison in Venezuela. Prisons in Venezuela are not run by the state. The state lost control of the prisons many, many years ago. And they felt that the best way to preserve some level of order was to let the prisoners run the prison. There are, to this day, prisons in Venezuela where there are nightclubs inside the prison that people outside the prison will go to.
So if those protesters were sent to those prisons, it's not a big deal, right? Maybe they will enjoy it somehow.
So the nightclubs, and people from outside will go into the prison to go to the nightclubs.
Yeah.
Well, they've got to make money
Nightclubs
somehow.
in the prisons?
Yes. Nightclubs,
I see
zoos,
that, yeah.
all this kind of
That
stuff.
makes perfect sense.
Where's Vice when you needed them?
Vice did a great series on Venezuelan prisons, like back in the day. And so with Tren de Aragua, there's this concept of what are called prans. And prans are the criminal leaders who run the prisons. So Tren de Aragua's gang, during the, 2017 era, they gained a lot of power. Because what happened was, when you let these prisoners that are running these criminal enterprises get so much power and run their own thing, they end up becoming more powerful than the institution that is there to keep them in prison. And they said, we want out of the prison. There was a big showdown, like a massive, violent showdown, where the criminal organization, Tren de Aragua, within the Aragua prison, which is a state in Venezuela, actually basically became so powerful that it's like almost like a guerrilla kind of militia. They had high grade weapons and a tank and things like this, and the state conceded because the state again is another criminal enterprise and said, fine, you no longer need to be contained to the prison. So you have this criminal organization that then said, here's what we're going to do. We are going to run all of the drug trafficking, human trafficking, and arms trafficking from Venezuela to the United States. And that benefits the Venezuelan regime and obviously the criminal organization. And so this is like decades of, there is no law and order in Venezuela to keep organized crime from becoming something capable of doing this, which is why the U.S. rightfully views Tren de Aragua as such a threat. So much so that even in Mexico, the cartels in Mexico that have a lot of power are losing power and ground within Mexico to Tren de Aragua as well. Partially also because the U.S. has recently made huge inroads to dissolve and break apart the federated cartel. I had notes in here about that too. It's a very important context for this conversation, is the Mexican cartels and where they sit. The U.S. has done a very good job of infiltrating them and breaking them up, similar to what they did with the mob families, with the Italian, mob and whatnot. The similar tactics were used to pit them against each other and kind of break apart these federations. What has come into power, though, in that vacuum is Tren de Aragua.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
Cookies.
See ya.
Good night.
I'm glad you enjoyed them.
See you.
Night, Karina.
Do you remember, this is a minor point, do you remember that one, a number of months ago, there was this, they euphemistically called him the Maryland Dad in the news stories, and it was this.
Oh, yes.
How much do you know about that? Was he Tren de Aragua or was he not Tren de Aragua? I forget the guy's name, but I think he ended up getting deported, and then U.S. senators went down to El Salvador to visit him and stuff. Can you shed some light on that? How much you know about that situation?
I mean, I don't know if he is or is not. I think, again, I think there's a lot of contradictions in the U.S. policy. What's happening geopolitically outside and then what's happening domestically is very confusing to me. I think that, the kind of knee-jerk stuff with the Salvadorian prisons and deporting people there is just setting a very bad precedence, and is kind of a dangerous game to play. Look, the guy maybe or maybe not is. I know of at least one case that I could say very confidently, someone who was sent to El Salvador that shouldn't have been, simply because of tattoos. When you make things a numbers game or some kind of show, that's what you're going to get. The domestic policy with Venezuelans is very, very confusing to me, considering, yes, there's a small minority that are here that are part of a larger criminal network. There are people who are Venezuelan, most likely Venezuelan spies that are probably inside the country trying to garner support from socialists or Democrats in this country to gain influence. But those are going to be a small minority, and the vast majority are just people trying to survive or people just wanting to make money and create a better life.
Another question I had was, you mentioned how, it's mafia-like stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then, interestingly enough, this Tren de Aragua just keeps accumulating power, and it's becoming a kind of mafia itself. If the U.S. does an intervention, let's say it's a military intervention, and let's say it does reasonably well, which is always something that's up in the air, but let's say it does.
It's like World War II.
Let's say it does reasonably well. What would what would the United States / Venezuelan, current Venezuelan resistance, I don't know if that's what they call themselves or what you would call them, but the current opposition forces or whatever, what kind of step, they're aware that Tren de Agua was a problem. How do we know that, okay, we do the regime change, we get out, and then 10 years later, Tren de Agua was running things? How do you make sure that doesn't happen?
I mean, I think that you need to have a functioning prison system. I think that the possible...
Not a nightclub?
Not a nightclub.
Okay.
I think that the possible outcomes there is that they continue to use something like the Salvadorian approach. Again, when you're in such dire situations, El Salvador is a good case for, you like Bukele or don't like Bukele, it doesn't really matter. He has made El Salvador a better country for people in El Salvador. That is undisputed. Now, where is he on things like, more liberal social policies? Very, very far right. There's no gay rights. There's no, he wants to get away with divorce. Like, he's incredibly conservative socially and very invested in making sure your home life is not private in El Salvador, right? So the social side, bad. But for daily life, he has turned that country around like no other in a very short amount of time. You'd need, in Venezuela, probably some of that as well in order to stabilize things, meaning be incredibly hard on crime. Incredibly hard on crime. That's the only way that you can really break apart the gangs, and you have that evidenced with El Salvador, who had severe, severe problems with organized crime and gangs. Severe problems. Yet they've turned it around. Is all of that he's done good and positive, and have there not been, unintended consequences or collateral damage? No, of course there's been that. But the vast majority of people have benefited from it.
So perhaps we could call it exercising the Bukele option.
Yeah. And I think that is an inevitability in order to stabilize Venezuela and create law and order. You need to have that very strong law and order in order to really turn things around.
Could Machado be the type of person who could do that, do you think?
I don't.
Because the thing I don't want is like the United States has to be responsible for that.
I don't see a situation where she doesn't make that part of the policies. It needs to be part of the initial policies, and I haven't read, she published out a full, not only economic plan, but a, reconciliation plan. I have not read through all of it. It's an incredibly elaborate document. It's focused mostly on economy. I haven't really read through all of it enough to give an opinion on where she is on law and order, because I think that has to be front and center, is, having a functional way of putting criminals in prison and making sure that there's strong incentives to not be a criminal.
Somebody earlier said, I forget who it was, that part of Trump's motivation for doing the Venezuela thing might be because he's losing support and he wants to boost his support.
I think Ernie said that, yeah.
I think, and this is my judgment of a factual matter, for good or for bad, I think it's true right now that the whole Venezuelan thing is losing Trump votes, and will, if he continues with it, will lose him more votes. I don't see how that can be turned around unless the U.S. government was to finance Eduardo here to give the talk he's given to us to a much bigger audience. That might turn it round. But basically, I think right now the factual situation is, for good or for bad, that it's a vote loser for Trump.
Yeah, and I don't understand with the contradictions, if they just make the connection between getting this regime out of power means less immigration to the United States, means less competition for wages here, that's why this is good for us. It's pretty simple to then say this is why we're doing that, instead of like all of the other discourse or talking points that exist around it seem very confusing to me.
bringing over drugs
Right, but you see, I think the reason that the reason that what I've just said is true is because of all the other international escapades of Trump, like the way he's behaved back and forth, now at a much better position, I think, on Ukraine, but still, again, for good or for bad, there's the Ukrainian debacle, which, as the total Ukrainian defeat by Russia becomes apparent to more and more people, is going to hurt Trump. And then there's Trump's involvement in the genocide in Gaza. And with all that going on, the perception is Trump is now doing something completely pointless and aimless because no one understands any rationale for it. I mean, when I say no one, I mean of the 90% of the least informed people in the US. And so, given that whole context, it's a big vote loser for Trump. And it looks as though Trump is going to blow it in terms of the midterms, and he's going to be in a much more beleaguered position after the midterms. And maybe the best chance for the Republicans would be for Trump to step down, because I think J.D. Vance would be a better president anyway, for a whole number of reasons.
It's just weird because like when I read this, I don't know if I'm just going to put on the most like America hat possible. When I read this and I think about what the strategy is, it's very sound, but it's just not what the rhetoric that people hear. And it's like, do they really think that American people are that ignorant that they can't handle the reality of we need to do more nearshoring, and that's good for us, and that's going to reduce the cost of goods because, yes, it means less jobs here, but it also means that we're not bringing it on a boat from halfway across the world. It also means that regionally, there's better economic stability in these countries that then lead to less migration, which then means you're not competing for those jobs because those people never have to come here as economic migrants. Like, I don't know why they don't turn some of this into their talking points.
I really think that, I think what you've said is quite telling, but I think it's a subtlety that will be lost on the electorate over a 6-month time horizon. I think that what you've got is the left think that any talk of getting rid of immigrants is terrible and amounts to Nazism, right? And then on the right, you've got this crisis symbolized by the killing of what's his name, Charlie Kirk. You've got this crisis of people who used to believe in Trump who have now lost all faith in Trump for a whole number of reasons. So those are your two groups. You know, and furthermore, no one, and I mean figuratively no one, I mean less than 1%, believes that Venezuela is a horrible dictatorship. And to convince people, assuming that everything you've said is true, to convince a large number of Americans that Venezuela is a really atrocious dictatorship which has resulted in not only killing and torture of hundreds of thousands of people, but also in economic collapse. To convince, it can't be done in a short space of time. That's the kind of thing that takes 10 years to convince people of something like that. Yeah. So my point is, it's a fact. It may be a sad fact, but it's a fact that the Venezuela operation is a political disaster for Trump. It's not a political disaster for Marco Rubio.
No.
But it's a political disaster for Trump.
Right. Yeah.
What was that comment about? What is killing of Charlie Kirk demonstrate?
Well, I think what the killing of Charlie Kirk has brought to a head all kinds of divisions within what's called the right. The right is suddenly in a crisis mode, and it's at the root of it all is Israel.
I don't understand what the crisis is. What is that?
The crisis is that minute by minute, I was going to say daily, but it's not daily, it's minute by minute. People who were formerly basically allied, like Jordan Peterson and Tucker Carlson, let's say, people like that, are at daggers drawn, ready to kill each other.
I don't understand why you say that. Why?
Because I I spend far too much time following what's going on YouTube. That's why you don't see it, and I do. It's the end of MAGA. It's
All right.
Woo! I
It's
don't understand why the killing of Charlie Kirk shows that.
because the most popular persuader today in the world is Candace Owens.
Okay.
And she's gone after TPUSA because of their conduct. And you have all these Zionists and other, sadly, morally deprived people who are on the other side of that. And there is intense mutual hatred between people who a couple of years ago were quite harmoniously allied. All the people who were anti-woke and basically had a common outlook on rejecting the left, they are now daggers drawn with each other.
Didn't the killing of Charlie Kirk bring people together on the?
It has done exactly the opposite. I mean, no, it hasn't brought people together. They've just arraigned the person who the conventional opinion says was the actual killer, and there were different reactions to that. Are just amazing.
Candace Owens kind of basically taken the mantle of Alex Jones now. And since the Charlie Kirk assassination has been like on a whoa, like.
Yeah, the big difference is that although it's interesting that Alex Jones has made a big comeback, but the difference is that Candace Owens is a brilliant communicator and a brilliant persuader, and 50,000 times more persuasive to the ordinary person than Alex Jones. That's the difference. It's Candace Owens who is in the driver's seat. She's on top. You cannot survive if you go up against Candace Owens. And that's why the widow of Charlie Kirk is now a reviled person, not because Candace Owens had said anything against her until very recently, the last couple of days, but because of her position, of being put in charge of, or being made the mouthpiece for TPUSA, when she's not equipped for that at all, she emotes, right? She's a typical female emoter.
Oh my God.
What does that mean?
It means that if people say things she doesn't like, she thinks it's a personal attack.
And Candace Owens doesn't?
Yeah, Candace Owens.
Absolutely, Candace Owens scrupulously avoids anything like that. She never emotes in response to people attacking her. She always explains why they're wrong.
But I mean, has Candace Owens proved that the government has tried to assassinate her, like France is out to get her?
No. A lot of her stuff is very speculative and has not been proved. That doesn't mean she's not entitled to speculate.
Sure, but her speculations are likely wrong.
Well,
Nick Fuentes has been
time will tell.
Slicing and dicing her for a while now as being just incredibly dumb and stupid, and talking about Egyptian planes, and she had visions of beekeepers, and I have not been following any of the Candace Owens stuff regarding Charlie Kirk. I might have seen a few episodes, in the immediate aftermath of it, but I haven't been following because it's just like, whatever. I'll never know the truth of what happened. I'm okay settling on whoever that guy, Tyler Robinson, I'm happy settling on that guy, probably did it, but am I certain of that? No. And if somebody said, like, no, it really was an Eastern Mediterranean country that was at the root of it all, I'd be like, it's not beyond the realm of possibility, but I don't know that it's very likely.
Yeah, right.
You know,
yeah.
So it's like, I don't follow it that much, but like, yeah, you know, you say that, you know, like if you go up against Candace Owens, like, you know, you can't do it, but like Nick Fuentes is doing it, and he continues to skyrocket.
Fuentes is, I don't know, I mean, that's a whole different topic.
I have a proposal to the chair. I have an 8-minute video. I find it very funny and kind of probably, now
it's not the time to play that video while
that's
we're
okay.
having this discussion.
You don't know what that video is. That's a very serious video.
I
just a proposal. I don't care. I agnostic. Let's put it that way.
We can do it later once we.
We don't even have to do it.
My main point is this: the right, conventional right, is falling apart right now. Whatever you think about the rights and wrongs of it, it's falling apart. And Trump's base is no longer there because a big percentage of his base doesn't trust him anymore. So, you know, this is whatever you think about the rights and wrongs of the issues, even if you think Candace Owens is absolutely a scoundrel and totally in the wrong.
The fact of the matter, it's happening.
Yeah, this is what's happening, and this comes back to my point that Trump's involvement in Venezuela is only adding to his problems. Every day that passes, he loses votes in the midterms because of this Venezuela issue. And I think that to explain to people the prima facie case for intervention in Venezuela in a way that would be convincing to a large proportion of the electorate is not something that can be done in a few months. So that, you know, I'm just drawing attention to that fact.
Huh.
Yeah,
It's not very easy to explain. It's kind of subtle. It's kind of like an unbalance. It's kind of hard to say 50-40, 51-49, right? I think that's how I see it. It's not as obvious as Charlie Kirk's death. It's not as obvious as other issues that split the right. But that issue is like a little bit.
Maybe I confuse things
foggy.
by mentioning Charlie Kirk, but the fact is that all these fissures on the right have been magnified by the way people have reacted to Charlie Kirk's death.
Yeah, I can see Trump is in a kind of vulnerable position now in terms of midterm. It's a really bad time for him.
Right. I cannot see Trump recovering from this.
Yeah, because has not delivered.
He has done amazing things. And maybe there is a way to recover from it, and he's going to do it. But it doesn't look like it to me, right?
He has a less 50% chance. Probably he has a
I don't see a
35% chance.
I don't see a 50% chance.
Right, it's less than 50%.
I don't see a 10% chance. I think he's cooked. But I wouldn't be terribly upset to be proved wrong, you know, because I don't like the alternative. I don't like the Clintons and all these other racketeers and terrorists waiting in the wings. You know, I'd rather have Trump, but there you go.
I think the shame of it is, if he hadn't burned so much political capital on not doing what he said he would do.
Right. This is
like he would have had enough momentum where people would have been very open and very receptive.
What is specifically referring to?
Things like mass deportations, things like I think Nick Fuentes is drawing the contrast between 2016 Trump and 2024 Trump, where 2016 Trump will talk about how corrupt the H-1B visa system is, but 2024 Trump will say we need to staple green cards to diplomas and we need to bring a whole bunch of H-1Bs, and the people who were on board for 2016 style Trump and thought they were going to get at least an approximation of that in 2024 felt incredibly betrayed.
Yeah.
Incredibly betrayed. Like, I think that could be maybe if there's like a top 2 or 3, it's in the top 2 or 3. It might even be the number 1 betrayal. The other thing is like the mass deportations. There's a lot of sizzle, but not so much steak, as the expression goes. Like, the numbers that are needed for the mass deportations that people voted for are just not materializing, and that's a problem. And I think more and more people are getting hip to the influence of such organizations as AIPAC and that Eastern Mediterranean country, and how they seem to have a dominant stranglehold. And even Trump will talk about how much Miriam Adelson will come, and she's always asking for more stuff for Israel and all this stuff. And then people see this, and it's like, wait a minute, what happened to America first? So he's burned so much credibility on all this stuff that he's in a deficit. That, like, if he comes for something that maybe at the end of the day is quite reasonable, which is like, hey, regime change over here will be different because of what seemed like very plausible sounding things that you're talking about. I'll take it at face value. He just doesn't have the political capital for it, is I think the point I'm getting from David. And it's like, that's such a shame, in certain respects.
He overpromised. So you have to, if you take that into account, he overpromised to begin with. It's not like, he promised some reasonable thing and something else happened, he couldn't deliver it. He overpromised, knowingly or not knowingly. Maybe he's wishful thinking. He didn't think he was